All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Logos. And today we're going to be learning about the history of Christian persecution. I've selected 4 specific time periods. One, as I'm sure you would already guess, the early Roman persecution, everything before Constantine and the battle at the Milvian Bridge, but also the French Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, and the Spanish Civil War. Those are the 4 periods which we're going to be discussing. And then I have tons of articles looking at Christian persecution around the world, as it is still in the 21st century the most persecuted religious tradition around the globe. And we'll be looking at places like the Middle East, Nigeria, China, North Korea. And this is a half and half stream. So the second half, I want to talk a little bit about things that may not be TOS appropriate on YouTube. So the second half, I'll be beginning with something you may be familiar with called the Gates of Toledo. And we'll be looking at the growth of aspects of Christian persecution. So are Christians persecuted in the West right now? Certainly, martyrdom isn't as prevalent as it was in other periods within history, but I will be, and in the opening monologue here, I will be discussing some of the commonalities we're seeing in the 21st century as it relates to early Roman persecution, the French Revolution, the Bolsheviks, and of course, the Spanish Civil War. So I'll be getting into things that are a little bit hairy, things, again, it'd be better to say over on the website than here on YouTube. So if you want to get access to the second half of this stream, of which once we're done here on YouTube, I'll be filming and then uploading today over on the website. So we'll be getting into things like the Olympic ceremony, and we can talk a little bit about that here. And again, the Dionysian celebration and mocking of the Last Supper. And certainly the mocking of Christianity is tied with the cultural growth that eventually leads to actual persecution and martyrdom. And I want to talk about the Olympics, about DJ Barbara Butch, the lesbian, Jewish, obese DJ that mocked and played Jesus Christ at the Olympics. We'll be talking about Thomas Jolly, the gay Jewish man who organized the Olympic celebration. We're talking about a woman named Marina Abramovich, who I recently found out, thanks to Mike Ben sharing it on X, that she is one of the official artists of the U.S. State Department. And we'll be looking at a little bit of what she has to say and her art, and again, how it relates to subversion, mockery, and essentially Satanism. And so we'll be getting into things like the Synagogue of Satan and certain religious traditions that seem to be guilty of mocking Christ more so than others. And interestingly enough, even after the Olympic ceremony mockery of the Last Supper, it was pretty eye-opening to see how many Muslims were upset about it. Obviously not to the same degree as Christians, and the response to mockery and persecution in various ways is Orthodox Christians, or Christians generally speaking, have a different response than maybe Muslims do. But we'll be talking about and relating mass immigration, again, the Gates of Toledo, various groups of people, and how this all connects together. So that's going to be the second half. That's going to be on the website. And this first half is really going to be focused on a historical overview, looking at the ways in which Christians were killed. So I have a whole section on 10 ways in which Christians were martyred and tortured throughout history. We'll be looking and then reading an overview of Roman persecution and 3 specific emperors. Then we'll be looking at the French Revolution. So, to begin, Roman persecution is obviously related to the Christians refusing to burn incense to the emperor. And so the refusal to participate in sort of secular pagan activities. And from what I found, at least tens of thousands to 200,000 Christians were martyred by the Romans. Now, this is going to be absolutely dwarfed by the Bolsheviks. In the French Revolution, what I found is that it's somewhere at least 16,000 Christians were guillotined, and in the ballpark of 200,000 plus were killed during the French Revolution. And the Bolsheviks, from everything that I was reading, again, the low end among secular scholars is 12 million, and the general consensus amongst Christians is around 20 million plus were martyred by the Bolsheviks and the USSR. And we'll talk a little bit about that in today's stream as well. And then in the Spanish Civil War, a period that I hadn't heard many people discuss, but we're going to go over that a little bit. I found 50 to 70,000 Christians were killed specifically for in that instance, their Catholic faith within Spain, when the Republicans, which was a conglomerate of communists, socialists, anarchists, and secular liberals, were able to take power of Spain and sort of undermine the monarchy and the authority of the Catholic Church. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll look at global persecution in the 21st century. Places like Nigeria are actually the leader in Christian persecution right now. And so northern Nigeria is ruled by people like Boko Haram, very militant Islamic groups. And from what I found, they've killed hundreds of thousands of Christians over the last decade or so. So we'll be looking at all that stuff, China, again, North Korea, all that. And then when we get into more controversial stuff, that's all going to be on the website, which should be uploaded later today. So smash that like, guys. Really appreciate everything that you guys do. We already have a few super chats. I know we're a little bit early today. So today we're streaming at a time I usually don't stream at, noon. Usually I try to start a stream between 5 p.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But given circumstances, and tonight we have a think tank meeting for premium members. So I can't do a 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock stream tonight. And tomorrow, this stream kind of feeds into a conversation I'm going to be having with Father Turbo Qualls. He'll be on at the exact same time tomorrow. We'll be streaming at 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we'll be getting into death to the world, Orthodox practice and asceticism. And he's going to be giving us some tools and how we move in opposition to the cultural zeitgeist and force that is clearly anti-Christian in the Western world. So that's going to be with Father Turbo Qualls tomorrow, again at the same time, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow. And I'm really looking forward to that. Should be a great conversation. So before we get into the opening monologue, and then much of the discussion today is going to be reading articles and giving you a sort of historical grounding for the lives of many martyrs. And we'll be discussing both Orthodox and Catholic, because when we were focusing on the French Revolution and the Spanish Civil War, obviously the vast majority of those killed in the name of Christ were Catholic. That is not to validate the Catholic Church or their sacraments as Orthodox Christians, but to demonstrate the general persecution and attack on the faith. So we'll be discussing all that. We had a couple super chats already sent in. Want to give a special thank you to Andrew, who throws in $10. So said, I felt I owed something to you for the long super chat. And so let's read what he had to say. Andrew said, they mocked their last Christian monarch in Christ, not to mention probably mocking the first bishop and saint of Paris, Saint Dionysius or Denis of Paris. True. A twist on words, Dionysius was the name of a pagan God, and Christianity eventually sanctified Greece, so people still had Greek names like Dionysius. And then he said, also interesting is that Christians were killed in stadiums. The old gods of the ancients were demons, and it seems these old gods want revenge. What better place to host this thing than the city where Christianity was first brutally removed in Europe, the French Revolution? Exactly. And we're going to be touching on that in regards to the Reign of Terror and the again, these sort of secular forces that seem to hate anybody who proclaims Christ in public. So thank you so much, Andrew, for the $10 super chat. I really appreciate that, brother. And then shout out to Spartan Up North, gifted 5 COTEL Crew memberships. Thank you so much, Spartan Up North. Let me see who was able to receive those. Let's see here. I got to refresh the YouTube so I can scroll back up. Light of Tabor, Mark Rotella. God bless you, Mark. Hope you and the family are good. Bill Hicks, R.I.P., Kiri Runty, and Danny Von Buskirk Bale all received COTEL Crew memberships from Spartan Up North. Thank you so much, Spartan Up North, for your support, brother. Really appreciate that. And shout out to Turpentine Cat, also became a COTEL Crew member. Thank you very much, Turpentine Cat. Really appreciate that. And enjoy all the emojis for YouTube members. And so if you guys would like to support, ask questions, or provide comments for today's conversation, please feel free to use Streamlabs or Dono Chat. Or if you prefer to use YouTube, feel free to use YouTube. And if you're really feeling generous, feel free to gift some COTEL Crew memberships here on YouTube. That's always greatly appreciated. And again, thank you to Spartan Up North for doing so. We also had a super chat over on Streamlabs by Storm the Cat, who throws in $10 and says, do you think modern society and technology affects the way evangelical Protestants interpret the Bible and theology? It is hard to explain, but the way they interpret the Bible seems mechanistic and soulless, whereas Orthodoxy is more in harmony with nature. Well, my immediate response, Storm the Cat, is, yeah, I think that evangelical or Protestantism, generally speaking, is informed by Enlightenment values. And in fact, when we look at the French Revolution today, unfortunately, many Protestants were advocates for the killing of various Catholics. They saw this as sort of revenge potentially for the 30 Years' War, but also their belief that the Pope was the Antichrist and that Catholic Church authority was something that needed to be undermined and destroyed in France. And so you can't help but notice that Protestantism, especially in the Western world, one, it's failed. There is no Protestant nation that is still majority Christian. I mean, historically, it was Northern Europe, and Northern Europe is the most secular atheist places in the world. And then when you look in America, America was generally considered the most Christian of the Protestant nations. But it's kind of hard to say that we're still a Christian nation, especially given the things that people celebrate coming out of Hollywood. And for example, I just found out that there was a Methodist minister or pastor in the U.S. who does his services in drag. And so that's going to definitely connect with our website conversation on the Paris Olympics opening ceremony and the sort of carnival and bacchanalia mixture of opposites. Again, we've talked about Baphomet, and I'm going to be bringing Baphomet up over on the website. This blending of opposites, this henosis, the Neoplatonic understanding of pure unity, the bringing of opposites to create a sort of unified structure, that we can see that this is the way in which Satan is operating. And so are there good Christians that are evangelicals and Protestants? Absolutely. And they're limited in maybe their understanding of church history, their historical context, whatever it may be, their geography. And so they're a Protestant to some degree. And obviously we're not endorsing Protestantism. It's a failed experiment, as we see that it constantly concedes morality and concedes aspects of culture. And yeah, it is more mechanistic. It is more rationalistic. I would argue that Protestantism is an ideology more so than a sacramental theology, because sacraments are just symbolic within the Protestant faith. Now, you have high church aspects, Lutheranism and stuff like that within Anglicanism, but look at the Anglican Church. Look at the high Lutheran churches. They have lesbian pastors now. And so they can't really conserve anything because they don't have a true tradition. And so when you're talking about orthodoxy seems to be more in harmonious alignment with nature and creation, I would say that's because it's the tradition of the apostles. It's the tradition of saints and witnesses. And Protestantism just doesn't have that. And Protestantism from its get-go was part of the sort of revolutionary spirit, I would argue. Now, did they have accurate criticisms of the Catholic churches and the selling of indulgences and all this stuff? Absolutely. But then that revolutionary spirit of divorcing itself from apostolic succession and creating new interpretations and hermeneutics and theological understandings of Scripture, I mean, this is a revolutionary spirit. And so you can't help but notice that communism, socialism, Nazism, whatever ism that you want to apply to it, I think these are, in a way, sort of outgrowths of the collapsing of Protestant faith. So that's my general take. Maybe you guys have a different opinion. That's fine. But I want to thank Storm the Cat for the $10 super chat. Really appreciate that, my man. And so just want to do a quick little housekeeping for anybody that would want to support my work. One of the best things you can do is go over to the website and become a website member. Again, the second half of today's stream is going to be for website members. It's only $5 a month. You can access, we have a whole video library over there, and I'm going to be doing more half and half streams as Jay recommended to me about a year ago. So we also have a premium members think tank meeting tonight. That's $25 a month. This is a group of men from around the world, mostly Orthodox, although we have non-Orthodox in the group. And we talk about the latest happenings in culture, in the world, could be politics, economics, theology, whatever it may be. We have a meeting tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you would like to join that or get access to the video library, please do so with this link right here. I would greatly appreciate that. And also, if anybody wants to set up a one-on-one session, you can do so with this link right here. We have openings for next Wednesday. If you guys would like to hop in a private Zoom meeting and talk about any topic your heart desires, we can do so there. And also, if anybody wants to sponsor a stream, we have a sponsored stream coming probably on Sunday, doing a deconstruction of the Church of Christ. The Church of Christ is a Protestant faith which claims to not be a denomination and claims to be the faith of the first century, although we'll take a stronger analysis of that and see if it's true. And they do things like perform the sacraments, or what they call the Eucharist or communion, every Sunday, although it's an open communion. So as long as you've made an altar call or you claim to be a Christian, you can have access to it. They don't have instruments, for example, so they're trying to get back to the historical traditional ways of worship. But are they the church of the first century? We're going to put that to the test, and I'm sure you guys already know my response there. And then also, if you guys would like to support my work, feel free to go to the shop. We got tons of t-shirts. Also, if you are in the market, or hold on, before we go there, you guys have seen me talking about all these prophecies of modern saints and stuff regarding eschatology. Well, I'm working with a non-for-profit organization that I highly recommend. If you want to have access to more of these prophecies, go to eschatonvigil.org. Eschatonvigil.org. They have a membership option now. You get thousands of these prophecies available, as well as books that are translated from Greek or Russian that are only available in English through the Eschaton Vigil. And so if you would like to have access to the Eschaton Vigil and all the prophecies that this gentleman has translated, you can do so by going to eschatonvigil.org. Check out the site, see if that's something you're interested in. If you want to have access to a lot of these things that are only available in English through this website, I would highly recommend that. And you can do so at eschatonvigil.org. And then last thing, if you guys are in the market for any Orthodox items, make sure you check out orthodoxdepot.com. Orthodoxdepot.com. Use promo code COTEL, and you'll get 10% off. It's a great way to help me out, as well as a good Orthodox company here in the Midwest United States. That's orthodoxdepot.com. They got icons, incense, prayer robes, whatever it may be. See if they have what you're looking for and use promo code COTEL. Okay, so now with all that being said, let's get into today's topic a little bit. So the first thing that I want to talk to you guys about is, again, this persecution of Christians. We're going to be talking in more detail, But Roman persecution is obviously going to be the most obvious. And doing research for today's stream, it was kind of interesting that whenever you put in Christian persecution, the vast majority of research results had to do with the first 3 centuries. And even looking on YouTube and trying to find videos discussing Christian persecution outside of the early Roman period was kind of difficult. The one that was the most obvious was the Bolsheviks, because they killed so many people. Again, 20 million plus Christians were killed throughout the life of the USSR. And the Bolsheviks, within just the first few years of taking power, killed millions of Christians just for their faith. And we're going to talk in detail about that, but I hardly found anything specifically referring to the French Revolution and the Spanish Civil War, despite the Spanish Civil War killing 50 to 70,000 Christians specifically for being Christian or being pro-Catholic or pro-monarchy. And so we're going to get into details about that. But why did the Romans persecute Christians? You guys probably already know. It had to do with the refusal to burn incense to the Roman emperor as God. And Christians were demonized as incestual, cannibals, all types of nasty things. And they were mocking the Eucharist, or whether it was a misunderstanding or a deliberate attack and recharacterization of what they're doing. You can be the arbiter of that. But it was also tied with a distinction between monotheism and polytheism. So within the Roman Empire, there's only one group that was able to not be persecuted by the empire and did not have to burn incense to the emperor. Can you guys guess who that is? It was the Jews. And so Jews were not forced. They had a sort of a privilege amongst the empire in which they did not have to sacrifice their monotheistic faith and reverence to the polytheism of the Roman pantheon as well as the Roman emperor. Now, Christians didn't get that privilege. And so Christians, when they refused to burn incense, were deemed enemies of the state. And because they were persecuted, their church had to go underground. And many churches, quote unquote, churches or church services or assemblies were done in people's houses. Because if word got out that Christians were worshiping or congregating, Roman authorities would then intervene. And so this distinction between monotheism and polytheism was a major contention for Rome. And I would argue that in a way, we're seeing the growth and the comeback of what I call the progressive regression, where progressivism is a regression back to the pre-Christian pagan world. And so what do we see at the Olympics? We see a celebration of Dionysius, who, again, whether it be Bacchus or Dionysius, is a sort of intoxicated deity. And the Last Supper is mocked as a sort of the banquet of Bacchus, or the banquet of Dionysius, the revival of these ancient gods of hedonism, intoxication, sexual orgy. And of course, at the Olympics, we see men portraying themselves in women's clothing, dancing very exotically. We see an overweight woman who is a Jewish lesbian DJ named DJ Barbara Butch, which actually is a pretty good name for a lesbian DJ, Barbara Butch. But nonetheless, the outrage that occurred after the opening ceremony, many Christians felt that this was a blasphemous description of, again, our Eucharistic celebration, the Last Supper, one of the most important events within our Christian faith. And then people started to defend it, say, oh, no, it's not an attack on the Last Supper. And unfortunately, for those who would argue that it wasn't, DJ Barbara Butch, which I'll be showing all in the second half of this video, she posted on Instagram that it was the Gay Testament that they were celebrating, clearly a reference to the New Testament, and that she, in another post, literally described herself as the Olympic Jesus. So according to the transgenders and the homosexuals that were at the opening ceremony, it was clear to them they were mocking the Last Supper in the name of inclusivity. And of course, the Olympic Committee then issued an apology that wasn't really much of an apology at all. Basically said they're sorry if you're offended, but this represents our values And the idea that the Republican values, this is a mantra that we're going to see also put forth in the French Revolution and the Spanish Civil War, that the Republican values of secularism are in opposition to historic Christian faith, something that both was reiterated in the 18th century as well as the 20th century. And so the Olympic Committee basically said the exact same thing. So the monotheism, polytheism distinction in the Roman Empire, it feels like we're reverting back to it. And I've talked about a book on the Silk Road by a scholar named Peter Frankopan, and he is not a Christian. But in that book, and I did a stream a long time ago discussing it, he highlights 4 things that when Christianity spread, especially into the Middle East, and we're referring to the Church of the East, which got destroyed by the rise of Islam, and the Church of the East had a different Christology. It was Nestorian, so it doesn't have the, it didn't have communion necessarily with the Orthodox Church. But what it did do, and he highlights in that book, is that as Christianity spread, it limited homosexual activity, incest, human sacrifice, and bestiality. And again, when we look at contemporary culture, is homosexuality on the rise? Absolutely. Incest, well, we discussed that all this weird pornography is always about like stepdad, stepmom, stepsisters, or even sometimes like legitimate like incestual references to parents, or I mean, it's disgusting. It's degenerate. And obviously pornography is something that none of us should be engaging in. And it's a mind virus. It's a demonic influence that is trying to manipulate your sexual energies. And I would say that much of the progressive regression is catalyzed by the manipulation of sexual energy and a form of human sacrifice. So Christianity limited human sacrifice. And yet with abortion, we're seeing that this is like the principal issue, especially the election coming up here in 2024, November 5th, here in the United States. All I'm hearing about from the Democratic, nominee, I guess, at this war, although they were never nominated, they were supplanted in a sort of palace coup style process. But Kamala Harris, her biggest thing is about reproductive rights, but reproductive is really about killing anything that would reproduce so that there are no children. And I can't help, as an Orthodox Christian, believe that abortion literally is a sacrifice to this satanic kingdom. And so the scripture is clear that the God of this world is Satan. And I saw Alex Jones upset because people were attacking him on X. How dare you say that Satan is the king of this world? And we're not saying that Christ isn't the King of Kings. We're not saying that Christ and the Holy Trinity isn't God of this. Of course it is. But even within Scripture, according to some of the epistles by Paul, he specifically refers to Satan as the God of this world. This is not blasphemous theology. This is not an elevation of the fall of Lucifer as the devil and Satan. No, this is the game. And he does control the power structures of this world. And this is why we'll see so many commonalities when we look at Christian persecution, be it the first 3 centuries, be it the 18th century, be it the 20th century with the Spanish Civil War and the Bolshevik Revolution. Why the commonalities? And what do we see? We see atheism, we see communism, we see collectivism, we see mantras of social justice, things that we can already hear iterated in the French Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, and the Spanish Civil War. It was about social justice and fixing the inequalities that they perceive that the church created or wouldn't address. Again, mantras that we continually hear today. And so the Romans, regarding the first 3 centuries, were fearful of the Christians because of their underground churches, that they were creating secret societies that were going to undermine the Roman Empire. And they were upset that Christians were trying to distance themselves from any pagan practices. And this led to, from what I found, depending on which emperor, so we have Nero, Decian, and Diocletian. We're going to be reading about those 3 emperors in particular. Thousands of Christians. Now, Diocletian was the most. It's tens of thousands. Now, I was trying to find an accurate number of total Christians martyred during the first, the Roman persecution period. And what I found was somewhere south or north of 200,000 total. And this is over 3 centuries. So that's, again, just what I found in my own investigation. In regards to the French Revolution, this was obviously filled with the Enlightenment values that wanted to undermine monarchy and create a sort of republican, democratic value and political structure. And so Enlightenment values were set to destroy church authority and influence. This was explicit during the French Revolution. Again, we're going to read more in detail about this, so I'll save all the specific details for the articles we're going to read. But secularism was celebrated. Of course, they took the Notre Dame Cathedral, one of the great Gothic cathedrals, which of course we know was burned and destroyed in many respects in 2018 by an unknown arson. And we're going to be talking about the prevalence of church burnings and church destruction and church property, because when we look at everything after the Roman persecution, because obviously the church didn't have the same authority and structure during the Roman era, but when we look at the French, the Bolsheviks, and the Spanish Civil War, destroying church property was an essential catalyst to their movement. And we can look at the contemporary happenings in Canada. So if you guys are familiar with the mass grave of Native Americans that was rumored that the Catholics had at one of their churches, this led to, I believe, 70 to 80 churches being burned and destroyed in Canada, of which now we know, it's come out recently, that this was all fabricated. There is no evidence of a mass grave. There's no evidence of mass killings of Native Americans that were done by the Catholics. We just have no evidence for that. And I'm not here to defend the Catholic Church in any regard, but just looking at the growing anti-Christian sentiments in Western civilization. That's Canada. Now we look at Europe, and European churches are being destroyed left, right, and center. I have an article that within the French Parliament, they were looking at what they called Christian phobia. Again, I hate these homophobia, Islamophobia. Phobia is an irrational fear. And so I don't think people have irrational fears that cause them to dislike certain activities or certain groups of people. But according to this request in Parliament, they conducted research in regards to Christian persecution in Europe. This is within the last decade. And they found that something either mocking or destroying of Christian property, the rate was 2.7 events per day in Europe. 2.7 events. That means at least 2 events, if we round, 3 times a day, at least in France. This was specifically focused on France. Christians are publicly mocked, or Christian property is destroyed or desecrated in some way or another. And we've seen attacks happening in Italy, people going into Catholic masses and trying to distract the liturgical service at play. Germany has been having multiple problems, obviously France, and obviously England. And what is the common denominator here is we're seeing mass migrations of people that have very different value systems. And yeah, we'll leave it at that. But anyways, the French Revolution, so the monarchy and the alliance between the church authority and the monarchy was deemed to be an absolute threat to progress. So again, we hear this narrative of progress. Well, this was the same motif and mantra of the French and Spanish Civil War and the Bolshevik Revolution. So when we look at Christian persecution in the last 400 years, it always is tied to Christianity being a limit to secular progress, and therefore it needs to be undermined and destroyed. And to do so, we see, as within the French Revolution, Bolshevik and Spanish, Christians must be taken out of anything regarding education, anything regarding politics, and typically anything regarding the judicial system. And so the French Revolution wanted to control the wealth and land that the church had, and they confiscated much of it. Same thing that the Bolsheviks did on the first day in power. One of the first things that the Bolsheviks did upon their revolution and the martyrdom of Tsar Nicholas and his family, God rest their soul, memory eternal, is they confiscated all church property and land, monasteries, and banned any form of public worship, which was also done during the Spanish Civil War. Any form of public worship was deemed unacceptable. It was prohibited. And so the French Revolution went through a process known as the De-Christianization, and we're going to be talking a little bit about that with the Reign of Terror. Now, from what I found, approximately, because we don't have hard fixed numbers for the Roman persecution or the French Revolution, but approximately, according to the French Revolution, 16,000 Christians were guillotined, and somewhere in the ballpark of 200,000 total Catholic believing Christians were killed during the French Revolution. Now, this is during the Reign of Terror. This is 1793 to 1794. 1776 is the American Revolution. And certainly that was still in opposition to the monarchy, but less so about traditional Christian faith. It wasn't about a revolution necessarily against the Anglican Church, but it was about religious freedom and all the Puritans and all these various Protestant faiths that came to the United States. But the French Revolution, again, they had the September massacres. If you're not familiar, we're going to read a little bit about the September massacres, in which 200 to 300 clergy were brought out in public and killed just for being Christian clergy, Catholic clergy. And so the Reign of Terror, generally speaking, is around 20,000 total Christians killed. We have the Vendée uprising. And so total, from what I found, like I said, is somewhere around probably north of 200,000 again. Now, the Bolshevik Revolution was, again, the Great Purge. This happened under Stalin in 1936 to 38, where approximately 100,000 clergy under Stalin were killed. 100,000 clergy. These are only clergymen. But from the beginning of the Lenin Marxist takeover by the Bolsheviks, which we know was a majority Jewish revolution, I don't think that is necessarily controversial. We know that to be the case, and I'll be getting more into some of the connections with the Bolshevik Revolution and contemporary events, again, in the second half of this stream, which will be available at the website. The Bolsheviks killed somewhere around 20 million Christians in total, and they promoted a Marxist-Leninist atheism, which obviously saw religion, according to the definition of religion by Karl Marx, the Jewish man who is the principal, you could say, founder of communism, that religion is the opium of the people. It's the thing that gets people sick. It's the reason for the degradation of society and economic and social inequality. He believed that through a sort of material Hegelian dialectic philosophy known as Marxism, that they would be able to create a sort of worldly utopia in the absence of God through the promotion of the proletariat regaining their rights and regaining higher working wages, which of course never came about, because once communism is in place, the people that are around the center of power, they're the ones that benefit to the detriment of everybody else in the country. And this is the case, the classic case of communism around the world. But the Bolsheviks made explicit that their revolution was about economic and social justice, about inequality. Again, you see, this rhetoric is very common and prevalent within our own society. Are we at the point of the Bolshevik Revolution? Not yet. Not yet. But I will highlight here in a minute instances in which public worship is already being banned. And then one of the point in cases is the woman in the UK that was arrested and charged for praying silently in her head outside of an abortion clinic. That in the UK, they have apparently some type of bubble or area surrounding any abortion clinic. So reproductive rights, which is, again, not about reproduction at all, that you cannot even pray silently without being an enemy of the state. Again, very reminiscent of the Bolshevik Revolution. And so secularism was the name of the game for the Bolsheviks, and they made sure there was 3 specific areas in which the Christians were not allowed to have any influence whatsoever. The first one was education, and we find this in the French, the Bolshevik, and the Spanish Civil War. The first thing that these groups do is make sure that Christians have no influence in regard to the education of children. Now, does that sound something familiar to today's scenario? I would argue absolutely. We see now that children are being taught about sodomy, transgenderism. There was just a law passed by Gavin Newsom, the governor of the state of California, who now, if your child wants to change their pronouns or even have gender reassignment surgery or hormones given to them, they can receive those through the public school without the notification to the parents. We've seen parents in both Canada and the United States having their children ripped away from them by the state for not affirming gender care. Now, this again, are we at the point of the Bolshevik Revolution where 12 to 20 million Christians are killed? No, not yet, but we're certainly seeing many of the elements come into place. And so education was the first one. The Bolsheviks made sure Christians had no influence in regards to education. The next one was law and politics, that the judicial system was in opposition to the Christian faith. And I'm going to give examples where I think this is also happening here in the United States and in Western Europe and the UK. I include that in Western Europe. So the last one was morality. Morality for the Bolsheviks, Christian morality had to be undermined. And Christian morality was seen as an opposition to the collectivization of the proletariat. Could you say that within Western civilization, Christian morality has been undermined? I would absolutely say so. And the rapid speed in which that has happened, as I will point out, it wasn't until under Barack Obama in 2014 that gay marriage was even made legal and a legal recognition. 2014, that means 10 years ago. That means within 1 decade, we've gone from, hey, we just want to get married like you guys and have tax breaks, to now we're going to educate your children about changing their genders and sterilizing them for the rest of their lives. Girls having mastectomies before they even reach puberty or even during puberty. This is outrageous. And this has all happened and transpired within a 10-year period. In a 10-year period in which, again, homosexual marriage wasn't even legalized in the United States, now we can look back to the Olympic opening ceremony and see how far we've come. And I personally do believe that Emmanuel Macron's wife is a man. I know that's been a topic of conversation lately online, but there seems to be considerable evidence that that is the case, in the fact that she cannot provide any photos of her being pregnant, nor any photos of her as a girl before the age of 30 something. And we know, based on their own story, that Brigitte Macron met Emmanuel when he was 14 years old. And they began to form a relationship. And she was in her 30s, if it's a she. And it makes more sense to me that it's most likely a man who is transgender. And as we've seen with the growth of MAPS, minor attracted persons, and the normalization of PDFs, we'll be careful because I know the AI picks up on many words. I've had like 3 streams taken down in the last month or so for various reasons. Luckily, YouTube hasn't flagged the channel because they're retroactively taking down streams from like a year to 2 years ago. I talked with Father Peter Hears. He said the same thing's happening to him. They're taking down streams. They're not giving you a strike against your YouTube channel, so you can still stream, but they've taken down 3 streams of mine within the last month and a half, and those are available at the website. So if you get a $5 a month membership, you can watch all those at the website. But obviously, there's discussions about Michael Blackman. Who exactly is Michael Blackman, and how does that relate to Barack Obama? I'll let you guys try to put those pieces together, but it certainly seems to be connected in various regards. So the Bolshevik Revolution, they made emphatic that Christians had to have no relationship to education, the judicial system, and politics, and that Christian morality had to be undermined because it, in its mere existence, was in opposition to their communist utopia. And so the Tsar and the church, they viewed as antithetical to communism, in the same way that the monarchy of France was in opposition to the French Revolution, and in the same way that the Spanish Civil War, the monarchy and the Catholic Church were in opposition to the progress of the Republicans. And we have to make sure here, when we talk about Republicans, most of the audience is American, but when we're talking about European politics, they do not exist on the same political spectrum, if you will, in regards to America. So Republican doesn't mean necessarily conservative. And when we talk about the Republicans of the Spanish Civil War, we're talking about a group of communists, socialists, anarchists, and secular liberals. It's about a secular Republican state, not so much of American neoconservative Republican values. Although I think you can make a strong case, given Leon Trotsky's influence in the beginning of the neoconservative party, that in a way, the Republican Party in America is indicative of the more European spectrum of incorporating collective ideologies, communism, socialism, these types of things. And this is why the Republican Party in America doesn't really conserve anything, because really it's not supposed to. But historically speaking, conservatism in America is more informed by Edmund Burke, the father of conservatism, which really was a sort of patriarchal appreciation of your ancestors, Christianity, and a little bit more traditional values. But when we talk about the Spanish Civil War, we're not talking about American-style Republicans. These are communists. But they were in opposition to the monarchy and saw the church as a threat that had to be undermined and destroyed. And so Christians were seen as the center of opposition to the Bolsheviks, and Christianity had to be destroyed. This led to multiple arrests, executions, and the destruction of church property, and many people were sent to the gulags because of this, especially during the purge of Stalin. So the Bolsheviks just killed people. And then with the growth of the USSR, once Stalin took power, he would just send many of them just to the gulag, and so they would die in labor camps. And then the anti-religious propaganda, some of you may not be familiar of what's called the League of the Militant Godless. This was a league of Marxist-Leninist communists within the USSR, the Bolsheviks, that literally identified themselves as the League of the Militant Godless. And their goal was, again, to destroy any belief in a transcendent entity, because ultimately the state becomes your God. And we are seeing this done in America. And this is the part of the welfare and social system, is that they want to get more and more people on the tit of the government. Why? Because the government then gains more and more authority over your own livelihood, whether you can purchase food, whether you have a place to live. And this is exactly what the communists wanted as well, the total dependency on the system, not dependency on a transcendent entity like God. So this is why Christianity and any belief in the Holy Trinity must be undermined, because the thing that is of only true existence, again, we can look at Michel Foucault, for example, right? Knowledge, power. The only thing that really exists is power. And so the only thing that then has the legal authority to issue power and force, of course, is the state, and the state then becomes your God. And so, yeah, the anti-religious propaganda was very effective for the Bolsheviks, along with the atrocities that occurred to scare people from any sort of resistance to their authority. And then we have the Spanish Civil War, a point in which I imagine most people aren't as familiar with, in that, again, it was formed by communists, socialists, anarchists, secular liberals, and they viewed their biggest angst against Christianity was that it's anti-progress. And so they wanted to become more, again, this is in the early 1930s, by the way. So the 1930s, this is after the Bolshevik Revolution, and they wanted to become more like a modern European state. And so they wanted to undermine the idea of a monarchy. This is obviously after the World War I and leads into World War II. The Catholic Church supported monarchy and nationalism. And so one of the interesting things that obviously in America, we're never going to get a monarchy. Now, again, maybe if America totally fell or something was recreated, but I'm very doubtful of that. And as Orthodox Christians, you know, our tradition, especially with the Byzantine Empire, monarchy is a favorable political structure. But nationalism and the idea of a sort of Christian-infused national identity that celebrates and proliferates Christian values, this is like enemy number one. If you've seen all these articles about Christian nationalism, the rise of Christian nationalism in America, and how it's always equated with fascism and Nazism. And I don't remember Nazism being like incredibly pro-Christian morality and Christianity generally speaking, but this is the characterization that is being laden. And you can't help but notice when you look at the French, the Bolsheviks, and the Spanish Civil War, that Christianity and the Christian church had a collective identity of a national identity. And this was something to be celebrated. And we're seeing this to be undermined, of course, in our society today. Anti-clericalism has deep historical roots within Spain, unfortunately. And this was another catalyst for the Spanish Civil War. And no Christian influence, again, repeating the French, repeating the Russian Bolshevik Revolution. They said no Christian influence was allowed in education, politics, or general society. So for general society, we can just replace morality, as the Bolsheviks said. And that Republicans, the commies, the socialists, the anarchists, wanted a new social order that was free from religion, allowing them to be modern people to attack economic and social injustice. Same thing we're hearing again in almost every Western society. And as I said, public worship was explicitly prohibited during the Spanish Civil War. And this led to massive destruction of churches and monasteries. And from my research, around 50 to 70,000 Catholics within Spain were murdered for their faith, or just for being Christians during the Spanish Civil War. And so what are some of the commonalities of everything that I just laid out with the contemporary period? Is the animosity towards Christians because we will not bow down to secular pagan idols. Right? How many people in the US are now being charged for doing burnouts on a sidewalk that has LGBTQ pride colors, the rainbow flag, which was initially, according to the Bible, a symbol of God's providence and looking out for us after the great flood. This is in Genesis, talking about Noah. And so they've incorporated this symbol, mocked it, inverted it to celebrate inclusivity, diversity, and equality. Right? So people in the United States are being charged with hate crimes for doing a burnout on these sidewalks. Meanwhile, or these crosswalks. Meanwhile, and I'm not in favor of anybody going to jail for burning the American flag, but isn't it ironic that, again, Netanyahu, the war criminal who received like 58 standing ovations in front of Congress. This was the U.S. record for the amount of standing ovations to a visiting speaker. I'm no fan of Israel. And again, we'll talk more about that in the second half of the video. Got to be careful here in regards to TOS. But he gets all this celebration, and outside of his pro-Israel genocide against the Palestinians, we have these radical leftists, Gays for Gaza, which, again, even the leader of Hamas said, we don't want your support. Like all these LGBTQ people promoting the Palestinian cause. The leader of Hamas came out and said, we don't want your support. You guys are an abomination. Of course, that probably didn't register with them. But if they're outside the Capitol building, burning American flags and such like that, of course, no charges are given to those people. And I'm not saying that they should be charged, but we see that there is a sort of secular religion with sacred images at play within Western civilization, particularly the rainbow flag. Just doing a burnout in a truck or a vehicle could get you a massive fine, if not jail time. But the burning of the American flag, not saying people need to go to jail, but just showcasing the irony and the paradox of it all, that's totally acceptable. In fact, those people are celebrated. Now, I personally believe, and I've talked about this in videos online on my website, I think that I wouldn't be surprised. Let's put it this way. We know for a fact that that Israel funded the creation of Hamas to delegitimize the Palestinian cause and create a constant terror threat in which they can constantly attack. Same was done with ISIS and the CIA. We know that's a historical fact. I wouldn't be surprised if Israel is actually funding many of these leftist organizations to go out and protest Netanyahu to create the visual display of chaos to then, if you support the Palestinians, well, then you're part of this pro-Hamas group. I really wouldn't be surprised if Israel funds that. So just keep that in mind. Yeah, somebody said like BLM. Exactly. It's the same stuff. Yeah, BLM's able to burn down entire cities, but if you do a burnout on a flag that has the rainbow colors, you could be going to prison. Seems like there are secular sacred symbols here. So I would say the first commonality, whether it be the Roman, the French, the Bolshevik, or the Spanish, is that we're seeing the rise of sacred images from a secular pagan standpoint. And of course, they have commonalities in regards to degeneracy and sexual immorality. The second point I have is that Christians are seen as an opposition to progress. This is constant. If you listen to the progressive rhetoric anywhere in the Western world, this is a shared sentiment that Christians either need to accommodate, meaning they need to have pride flags outside their church. They need to have drag queen story hour. The Methodist pastor that I mentioned, and you guys can just Google this, or I wouldn't Google it, maybe DuckDuckGo or Brave search. I use Brave. But there's a Methodist pastor who literally dresses up in drag to perform all his sermons and his services. Therefore, Christians need to accommodate to all these things. They need to be part of progress in the name of inclusivity and Christ's love for all people. But if you resist this on the basis of biblical teachings, if you resist this based on the historical tradition of the church, well, then you're outdated, you're antiquated, you're in opposition to all that's good and beautiful for everybody else. Same thing we've seen in these other revolutions. And so secular education, just like I talked about with the French, the Bolsheviks, and the Spanish, they had to eliminate any Christian influence in public education. Well, same thing's true in America. You're not allowed to say prayers except for certain states. I believe Louisiana and Oklahoma now force people to do the Pledge of Allegiance, and that the Ten Commandments are present, I believe, and that they can do Christian prayer in the classroom. But for the vast majority of the states, Christianity cannot be present anywhere in the classroom. And yet all these videos from places like Libs of TikTok show how many teachers have LGBTQ, BLM, transgender flags in their classroom. So certain images, certain sacred images are allowed, others are not. So we're seeing the revulsion against Christian influence in education already present in the Western world. Economic and social justice, as I said, we hear that rhetoric as well, that if we need economic and social justice, we have to get all these conservative Christians out of the way because they're holding progress back. The transgression of Christian morality, again, transgenderism, Baphomet. I'll be talking more about this in the second half of this stream on the website about Baphomet in the amalgamation of opposites as a symbol of unity and progress. This is a form of Neoplatonic kenosis that we are seeing totally present in the Western world. And of course, the Olympics is a great example of that. And I'll speak in more detail about some of the movers and shakers of the Olympic celebration again in the second half. No public worship or Christian symbols allowed, right? I believe there's only a couple state capitals that have the Ten Commandments present because there's been such a secular push that we have to have a separation of church and state that we're already seeing in the Western world and more in America, and which was typically more Christian than Western Europe, that there can be no form of public worship or public Christian celebration. Recently, a woman was arrested for blocking. They claimed that she was 70 some years old, and she's sentenced to 3 years in prison for blocking the entrance to an abortion center. Now, what they did was they chained themselves up. This was a Catholic group, and they sat and prayed the rosary in front of an abortion clinic. Now, the irony is these people are all given jail sentences of a year or more, all the people that were involved. Some received more than others. And yet we see the climate protesters block entire highways, ambulances, people trying to get to work, people trying to get home from work, get to their families. That's not a problem. Those people are not charged. In fact, we see the police, for example, in San Francisco, when they blocked the Golden Gate Bridge, literally protect them so that nobody could come and attack the climate change activists. Now, this, to me, appears to be the state protecting those who are undermining just general civilization and daily activity. Yet, if you block an abortion clinic, you're immediately charged. Interesting. We see the rise of communism, socialism, anarchy, and secular liberal values. Of course, that is the progressive movement, but we have to be careful of people who are like a person like Jackson Hinkle. This is a guy who has a really popular X page. He claims to be an Orthodox Christian. He's not an Orthodox Christian. I don't know of anybody in America who said that he attends their service regularly. I don't even know if he ever goes to a parish or actually attends liturgy. But he claims to be an Orthodox Christian because he's always pro-Russia, pro-Russia, pro-Russia. Well, he's an explicit and pro-communist individual. He literally just, 3 or 4 days maybe it was last week. He was celebrating the founding of the American Communist Party. We have to watch out. This is somebody who is perceived to be on the right wing, and yet he's trying to get, and I looked at his page, and unfortunately a lot of Orthodox Christian men follow him, and yet he's explicitly pro-communism. And I just told you about the Bolshevik Revolution. Communism and Christianity are antithetical. Now, I'm not saying that Christians can't have socialist understandings of helping the needy and the poor. That's all fine. But communism is an inherently atheistic structure, and it is explicitly anti-Christian. And people like Jackson Hinkle are literally confusing and unfortunately getting young Christian men who are trying to be edgy and controversial to explicitly support communism in America. This is degenerate. This is terrible. This is something that no Christian. No, he sounds like a glowing. I really suspect that he is, because how could he not be a Fed if his X page is constantly being promoted? He has one of the most engaged X accounts on X. I think he's in like the top 10 accounts that have engagement. And he claims to be an Orthodox Christian. He's super pro-Russia, but he's also incredibly pro-communism. And he's constantly defending Stalin. And recently, he's defending anybody who criticizes Venezuela, because Maduro is actually a great leader, and communism is great in Venezuela, despite the videos that we're seeing massive, massive protests. And we know that the election of Maduro that happened just a few days ago, the same thing's going to happen in the U.S. He had thugs go and stop people from voting. They locked doors to precincts so people couldn't vote. They went and took the vote total so nobody could count them, and just declared that Maduro was the winner by like 52%. I doubt it. I doubt it. But we've already seen these things kind of play out in America in 2020. And I do suspect that Jackson Hinkle is a Fed, and he's being paid for his promotion of all these degenerate ideas. That's my speculation, at least. But moving forward, we see the cult of reason, right? So the cult of reason during the French Revolution not only rededicated the Notre Dame Cathedral to the cult of reason, but they put a harlot, a whore, on the altar to symbolize what is being venerated. And when we look at the cult of reason, what immediately stands out to me is something like transhumanism. It's like these people that are highly rational, at least we're told, highly rational in this orderliness of the sort of science of technology and transhumanism and the technocratic structure that's emerging around us. To me, this is like the other side of the coin. You have these hedonistic communist socialist degenerates, and then on the other side, you have people that are probably still degenerate, but they're part of more of the cult of reason and sort of secular orderliness and this type of thing. So I would say this is another commonality with the 21st century that we see through these periods of Christian persecution. The next one is arrest and destruction of church property. As I said, a UK woman was arrested and sentenced for praying silently. This was not a public prayer. She was not saying anything out loud. She was simply standing outside an abortion clinic on the sidewalk, praying silently, and was arrested for this. And you guys can go look up the articles for that. I think I may have a few that we may look at today. And then same thing happened in the U.S. in regards to the blocking of abortion clinics. This was something, as I mentioned, multiple people were sentenced to a year or more in jail for blocking an abortion clinic. And then, of course, the Canadian and European churches, thousands of churches have been desecrated or burned in Europe. And I think it's up to like 80 some in Canada that have been burned down. And even here in America, we're seeing people barge into liturgical services to mock them, to degrade them. It's to the point now, and it's happened even here in Indianapolis. I'm in Indiana. There is a Catholic church in Indianapolis in which a man went in there planning to be quite violent. Fortunately for them, the men escorted him out of the church very quickly. But his plan was to barge in during a Sunday service, destroy things, mock people, be violent towards people. And this has caused even in my Orthodox parish that we now are taking active measures to protect the premise. I'll just put it that way. And that fortunately, our state is a constitutional carry. And this was even advocated by the local police, because here in Indiana, we have a very conservative state, and the federal government, of course, is sending thousands of people from different parts of the world to live in the Indianapolis area. And this has caused great violence and crime to skyrocket in various areas. And even the police of the county and the city in which my parish is said, hey, guys, you should beware. We're finding multiple instances of people desecrating and attacking churches. Just be careful. And they actually recommended us to take further actions and precautions in case anybody were to try to do something vulgar or violent against our parishioners. So this is happening in the Western world right now. Now, is it to the state of Christian persecution as we've already discussed? No, but certainly we're seeing the seeds already being planted. It just takes a flip. It just takes the vast majority. It just takes 50 to 51% of the nation to be anti-Christian explicitly for the revolution to take place. And in some places, like the Spanish Civil War, wasn't even 50% necessarily. There was still a large contingent that was supportive of the monarchy and the church. It just takes a significant portion of the population to be explicitly anti-Christian to enact these policies and their values. So it's already happening. We have to be aware of it. And the last thing that I'll say is politics and religious values must be separated. And this is where I see, if you guys just put in, no matter what search engine you use, if you just put in Christian nationalism, you'll find hundreds of articles demonizing anybody that promotes the idea of Christian nationalism. And this is even an ambiguous concept itself. Who exactly is a Christian nationalist? What is Christian nationalism? And they basically associate it as a theocracy of some sort. But it's like enemy number one. So I was finding almost every major publication that I could find, both in Europe and in America, Christian nationalism, this major threat. Well, why is this? Because as we talked about with the French, the Bolshevik revolutions, and the Spanish Civil War, there absolutely has to be a separation of politics and Christian values. People cannot influence the political structure through their Christian values. And this is why I believe Christian nationalism is enemy number one to the political establishment. Because if that fire were to spread and more people thought, you know what, maybe I am okay with the federalist structure of the United States, but I want more explicit Christian values, this is something that they can't have happen, because it would be a resistant force to the revolution that they're ultimately in favor of. So those are a few of my points. It went a little bit longer we're an hour and 13 into the stream, a little bit longer than I was expecting. But now I want to get into historical articles and actually learning about Roman persecution, the French Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, and the Spanish Civil War. So smash that like, guys. I really appreciate all you guys being here. I know we're a little bit early than we normally are. Let me see if anybody sent some things in. We got a super chat by the great and powerful iPack Arts. This is my main man. He helps me with all my thumbnails, all my clip videos, and my shorts. Major thank you to iPack Arts. He says, I don't know if this has been discussed, but also a good example is what the Germans did to the clergy in Poland during World War II. Yeah, another great example. And I wasn't going to focus so much on World War II per se. Obviously, the Bolshevik Revolution is just before, along with the Spanish Civil War, right before World War II. But you're absolutely right. And this idea of promotion of Adolf Hitler and Nazism by Orthodox, I don't get it. I really don't get it, because we can all agree that maybe there's facts about World War II, and I'm not going to get into specifics, that aren't up to par, that maybe the full story we haven't been told. That certainly seems to be the case, but that doesn't mean that the Nazis and Adolf Hitler are heroes for orthodoxy and traditional values. That's ridiculous. Even though I'm familiar with what was going on in Berlin and the books that the Nazis burned before, which was the home and the center of transgenderism and like sex research. But anyways, I digress. But yeah, great point, iPack Arts. Really appreciate that. Again, he said, I don't know if it's been discussed, but also a good example is what the Germans did to clergy in Poland during World War II. and he is of Polish descent. So shout out to IPAC Arts. Really appreciate you, brother. Thank you for the $5 super chat. And shout out to Well Emmanuel, 17-month COTEL crew member. Thank you so much, Well Emmanuel, for your support. I really appreciate it. And he says, thanks. I thank you, brother. Thank you for your support. Really do appreciate it. And let me just check the dono chats before we get into some of these articles. Oh my gosh. AC just, oh my gosh. AC, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Wow. AC just gifted, AC just sent in two $100.50 super chats plus another $100. That's $400. Shout out to AC. Wow. Wow. Thank you so much, brother. AC just sent in $400 super chat over on the dono chat. Thank you so much, AC. No comment. No comment. AC, thank you very, very, very much, brother. I really appreciate that. That is some very generous offerings. Thank you very much, AC. God bless you, brother. Wow. Thank you. Okay. So major shout out. Can we get some chads? All the COTEL crew members, can we get some chat emojis in the chat for AC? Thank you very much, brother, for that. And White Soul Boy Whiteboard, shout out to our sister. She said he's got a great channel too. Everyone should go check him out at AC. That's right. Go subscribe to his YouTube channel. Incredibly generous. Thank you so much, AC. God bless you, bro. Really appreciate that. Okay. Now let's get into these articles that I wanted to show you guys and kind of go over. So now we're going to focus more on the historical overview. Again, all the things regarding, again, the gates of Toledo. You can see if you look at my tabs, everything from this point to the right is going to be for the member section. We're going to be getting into things that probably aren't TOS appropriate. So everything before this is what I want to get into you guys here on YouTube. And so the first one is, what does the Bible say about Christian persecution? And we're just going to read a few of these. And this is 2 Timothy. In fact, everyone who wants to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. Matthew 5:10, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That is why, for Christ's sake, 2 Corinthians 12:10, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, and difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. And this means about our dependency on Christ. Again, and who is more mocked and persecuted than Christ himself? You guys can just go on the internet and put in Bible verses on mocking Christ. And there's probably 17 plus verses specifically talking about the Pharisees and the Jews mocking Christ during his ministry. John 15:18, if the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. Luke 6:2, blessed are you when people hate you, when they exclude you and insult you and reject your name as evil because of the Son of Man. Romans 8:35, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall trouble or hardship or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? Of course not. And then here's Christ's words himself. Truly, I tell you, Jesus replied, no one who has left home or brothers or sisters or mother or father or children or fields for me and the gospel will fail to receive 100 times as much in the present age. Homes, brothers, sisters, mothers, children, and fields, along with persecutions, and in the age to come, eternal life. And this, I wanted to open with this. We're not going to read all of them. I'll stop there. But the reason why I wanted to open with these Bible verses is to demonstrate what is the Christian response to persecution. It means that we're doing something right. It means that we are following Christ, because only those who hate God are the ones that want to persecute Christians. And so, hey, AC just stopped in. AC, thank you so much, brother. Thank you very, very, very much for your generous support. Really appreciate that, my man. Thank you very much. Everybody go subscribe to AC's YouTube channel. Thank you very much, AC. So my point is, Christian persecution isn't anything that's abnormal. In fact, normal. And Christ is our example of what the world does to those who follow Christ, because look at what they did to Christ himself. And so when we look at the Olympic opening ceremony, this is something obviously to be annoyed with, to take note of, to see the degradation of Western civilization, but also to realize that what's the common denominator? As we go through the articles today, why is it that Christianity is still the most persecuted religion in the world? Do the Christians have tons of terrorists? Are they going into various countries and blowing people up? No. No, it's not. That must be that Christian Inquisition, right? Christians are going into different nations and slaughtering tons of people. No, that's not the case either. So why is it that Christians in the 21st century are still the most persecuted religion in the world? It's because of this. It's because of Satan's kingdom. It's because of the ruler of this world. That's why. And so the next one I wanted to show you guys is what a martyr is. This is just going to be real quick. A martyr is one who gives his life for Christ, physically dying to the faith, or physically dying as a witness to the faith. Martyr itself comes from the Greek matros, meaning witness. By traditional liturgical ranking, the martyrs are the first among the saints. Tertullian once said that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church, and the body of Christ continually witnesses to this reality. Where the persecution of the Orthodox faith becomes great enough that Christians are killed for their faith, history typically records a resurgence of faith and piety among the people of that region. And I think, obviously, giving our conversation today, the most obvious example of that is Russia itself. Russia was under the communist USSR regime for so long, and now they're seeing a massive resurgence in the faith. So I think, again, that still holds true. Here, I want to show you guys 10 horrifying tortures of early Christians. So how did they kill early Christians? This I found fascinating. And so we're just going to read, again, the 10 ways in which they were killed historically. And we can point towards also in the Bolshevik Revolution, it wasn't uncommon that they would tie Christians to two different horses, and then they would begin to sprint in opposite directions to literally tear the limbs off Christians. This is a recorded historical fact. The first one is cooked to death. This is St. Lawrence of Rome is well known for the manner of his death than his ministry and life. When a Roman prefect demanded that tithes of the church be handed over to the Roman state, Lawrence brought forth his impoverished congregation, who he stated were the tithes, as the money had been given them for food. The infuriated prefect ordered metal plates to be set over a bed of coals and heated until they were red hot. Lawrence was then bound and laid naked on them face up. His flesh sizzled, smoked, and was burned black, yet Lawrence made no outcry, nor did he beg forgiveness from the prefect. He finally called in a clear voice, "I am done on that side. Turn me over and eat." This is how the patron saint of cook. He is now the patron saint of cooks. Peter, a eunuch of Diocletian's household, was discovered to be a Christian and cooked in the same manner as Lawrence of Rome. Number 9, dragged to death. Mark, who wrote the Gospel of Mark, founded the Christian church in Alexandria and preached to the masses that they should give up their Egyptian gods and goddesses. It's not clear how long he was able to keep this up, but he did convert many before AD 68, when an angry mob tied a rope around his neck and dragged him through the streets behind a chariot for 2 days without interruption. The dragging continued even after his death until his bones were showing. According to some sources, Hippolytus of Rome, an elder under Pope Pontian, was dragged to death behind a wild horse on the island of Sardinia. He is now the patron saint of horses. In 257, Saturnius of Toulouse was dragged behind a bull around the city until the bull was chased down a flight of stone steps and Saturnian's brain was dashed from his skull. Julian the Apostate succeeded Constantius II, who succeeded his father Constantine the Great in 361. Julian restored the pagan religion to the empire and horribly persecuted Christians. Within 2 years, he was ordering them sought out and dragged to death in every city, along with the caravan routes throughout Palestine. Skinned, number 8. Removal of the skin is so excruciating that victims invariably passed out multiple times during the torture. To prevent this, They were usually hung upside down, so the excess blood flow to their brains forced them to remain conscious. The skin is not easy to remove, and torturers rarely made an effort to remove it in one piece unless they wanted a trophy. Typically, the skin was sliced into strips, then each strip peeled from the body with the aid of a knife. Often the skin was thrown into a fire or to animals or dangled before the victim's eyes. This is how Bartholomew, one of the 12 apostles, was killed by the locals in Armenia, into whose language he translated Matthew's gospel. The Armenians refused to abandon their idols and executed Bartholomew by crucifying him upside down and skinning him. Sewn into skins and eaten by dogs. This torture was devised by Nero himself, not merely to cause Christians pain, but to entertain him and his guests. Nero was infamously rumored to have crucified Christians on trees in his gardens, coated them with wax, and set them on fire to light his nightly walks. He evidently didn't mind the stench. Others he ordered sewn into hides. Any large animal was skinned, and the prepared skin sewn around the victims, except the heads, hands, and feet. Then ravenous dogs were set loose. The victim could only scuttle around on all fours like a crab. Nero was said to have laughed heartily as the dogs gnawed at the skin as they would a bone. And so Julian of Antioch was tortured every day for an entire year and displayed to the crowds in every town in Cilicia. We'll go to the next one. 6, starved to death. Emperor Decius ruled from 249 to 251 when he was killed at the Battle of Abritus in Bulgaria. During his short reign, he had a temple built in Ephesus and required that all Christians sacrifice for the good of the emperor, not to the emperor, since this would impute divinity to Decius, who was still alive. This was against Roman law, but the Christians largely considered any similar sacrifice counter their faith and refused, even when warned that they would be tortured to death. Pope Fabian himself was beheaded over the issue. Boiled to death. Boiling water causes almost instant first-degree burns and will cause third-degree burns after 10 minutes. Eventually, the flesh will slough away deep into the muscle, and death is usually marked by the water turning red as it finally breaches the blood vessels. Tradition holds that John the Apostle, who wrote the Gospel of John, survived without harm after being boiled in a cauldron of oil, after which he was exiled to Patmos Island in the Aegean. In 222, a woman named Cecilia, possibly Saint Cecilia, was boiled in a bathtub over a bed of coals for a day and a half after she converted her husband and brother. They were beheaded, as was the captain who led them to their deaths, because he converted in view of their victims' fearlessness. The Inquisition's auto da fe. By the 13th century, everybody expected the Spanish Inquisition. The church formed inquisitions in every country in Western Europe, but the Spanish was the most brutal and feared. Anyone found guilty even of reading the Bible in his or her own language was tried, usually convicted, and often executed. The ceremony of execution was torture and was called an auto da fe, the act of faith. The Inquisition was required not to spill any blood in performing tortures, but this requirement was usually ignored. Ground to death in a mill, number 3. Under the rule of Maximian, Saint Victor Marcus may have suffered the most excruciating death of all. He secretly ministered to his parishioners in Milan until about 303, when he was discovered and immediately dragged through the streets behind a horse while the crowd stripped him naked and beat him, then demanded him recant. He refused and was stretched on the rack for a day, during which time he prayed to God for patience. He was then imprisoned and immediately converted 3 of his guards. When Maximian heard of this, he ordered the guards beheaded, and Victor racked again. While the torturers beat him savagely with clubs, he was ordered to recant and refused a 3rd time. Maximian had a Roman altar built and ordered Victor to sacrifice incense on it to Jupiter. This enraged Victor, who kicked over the altar. Maximian furiously ordered the offending foot cut off, after which Victor was flung into a stone mill used to grind up wheat into flour, and the torturers ground him to death. Number 4, broken on the wheel. This one is nasty. The breaking wheel is a horribly painful method of torture in which the victim was tied to the side of a wheel laid flat on the ground. Then one of the two methods was employed. Either the torturer used a sledgehammer to smash every limb to pulp, or the wheel was made to turn in transection with another, like gears, so that the victim's body was crushed between them. No bone or section of bone was spared, except the torso and head to keep the victim alive. Sometimes the genitals were smashed. Then the victim was left in the condition to die from exposure, blood loss, or to be beaten by birds and ants. This was the fate of a man called Peter. In about 250, he was martyred along with 3 others, Paul, Andrew, and Dionysia. Dionysia was condemned to be raped to death, but tradition holds that an angel spared her, and the 3 nominated rapists ran away in fear. She then escaped prison, but desired to be martyred like her friends and allowed the authorities to recapture her. She was beheaded, and Paul and Andrew were stoned. Peter was broken on the wheel, then beheaded. And then the number 1 torture that was, again, aimed at Christians is having their guts eaten by pigs. This is terrible. In 363, under Julian the Apostate, St. Marcus was bishop of Arethusa, a town near modern Apamea in Syria. Julian ordered Marcus to repair a dilapidated pagan temple, but Marcus destroyed it instead, then fled the city. He soon realized that his Christian followers would pay for what had been done if he did not return, so he did. The enraged townspeople dragged him through the streets, stripped him naked, stabbed him all over his body with their pencils and quills, then smeared him with honey and suspended him in a basket in a town square where the wasps and bees would swarm into the basket and devour him. Several of his followers were discovered and dragged down by the mob, who ripped their bellies open with their bare hands. Corn was packed into their abdomens, and pigs were set on them. The pigs devoured the corn and their intestines. So I say all this, guys, to give you a little bit of insight in regards to the lengths of Christian persecution and what some of our saints, martyrs, and ancestors actually had to deal with. The super chat just came in from Josiah Elleron, throws in $10. Thank you so much, Josiah. He says, I'm a former Catholic, now Protestant minister, but I will be entering Orthodox catechumenate, largely due to your show and others. Thanks for being the Lord's vessel to bring people to truth. Well, Josiah, glory to God. And again, I am humbled if I have helped in any way, but glory to God, brother. Really, really love to hear that you're joining the Orthodox Church, the true body of Christ, and becoming an Orthodox catechumen. So glory to God. And thank you so much for your support and your $10 super chat. Really appreciate that. Thank you, Josiah. And so the next thing, I have these articles, again, looking more at Christian persecution within the Roman Empire. And I want to share these links with you guys because just to get through everything today, I want to focus a little bit more on the French, the Bolshevik, and the Spanish Civil War. So if you'd like to, here's the article on the 10 ways in which early Christians were tortured. Let me share that with you guys. Here's that. And then this is I found a really good article here, right here. Early Christian martyrs, persecutions in the Roman Empire. We can read a little bit real quick. The first Christian martyr, Stephen, stoning by the Jewish council. The earliest Christians did not fear Roman persecution as much as they feared established Judaism. Again, this is going to connect with the second half of the stream over on the website. The Jews would not accept the Christians' instance that Jesus was the Son of God. At most, they would agree that he was a prophet and teacher. The Jewish leaders also feared that Christianity would split the Jewish faith in two. The tiny Christian community that arose in Jerusalem in the wake of Christ's crucifixion was therefore thoroughly persecuted. And then the first official martyr was not killed by the Romans, but the Jews. The martyr's name was Stephen, and he was stoned to death in the year 35 CE by order of the Jewish council. Among the executioner was a man named Saul, who later became a Christian convert known as the Apostle Paul. So I'm sure some of you guys are familiar with that. Nero, we talked a little bit about his crucifying of Christians in his own garden. So shortly after the fire, The hunt for the capital's Christians began. First, Nero had those who admitted to being Christians arrested, and on their statements, a large group of others was condemned, writes Tacitus. According to the historian, they were not convicted of arson, but just as much of their hatred of man. The punishment was death. Nero wanted to show that he was a man of the people, so he made the executions a public spectacle, kind of like the public spectacle of the Olympics opening ceremony. Their death was made into a sport. Dressed in animal skins, they were torn into pieces by dogs or crucified. Other Christians were hung on poles and drenched in tar. At night, executioners lit the human torches so that they could light up the streets as the screams resounded, and a sickening smell of burning flesh settled over Rome. St. Ignatius of Antioch, a beacon of faith and courage in the face of persecution. Ignatius emphasized the importance of unity among believers and obedience to lawful authority. He also wrote about the importance of the Eucharist and the role of bishops and the church. Despite the harsh circumstances, Ignatius remained positive and hopeful. He was willing to die for God, but only if it wouldn't compromise others' faith. The exact date of St. Ignatius of Antioch's death is unknown, but is believed to have occurred around 107 CE. According to tradition, he was martyred during the reign of Emperor Trajan. He was sent to Rome, where he was thrown to the lions as a form of execution. Again, and he warmly welcomed the execution, and because he was not afraid of the lions killing him, he also converted thousands of people in attendance. And then brutal methods of execution, we already talked about that. So I'm going to share this link with you guys as well. This is a really good article if you guys want to learn more about that. Here is another good article, The Persecution in the Early Church, a gallery of persecuting emperors. So Claudius, 41 through 54, perhaps the first to persecute Christians inadvertently. Nero, the savage madman in whose reign Peter and Paul were martyred. This is 54 through 68. We talked a little bit about Nero. Domitian, does Revelation depict him as a hideous beast? The historian Pliny called Domitian the beast from hell who sat in its den licking blood. In the book of Revelation, John of the Apocalypse may have referred to Domitian when he described a beast from the abyss who blasphemes heaven and drinks the blood of the saints. And certainly there's been Antichrist prototypes throughout history. Domitian was the first emperor to have himself officially titled in Rome as God the Lord. He insisted that other people hail his greatness with acclamations like Lord of the earth, invincible, glory, holy, and thou alone. When he ordered people to give him divine honors, Jews and no doubt Christians balked. Again, Christians were allowed to not give him honors. They were the only group in the Roman Empire that didn't have to venerate Roman imperial authority. However, the beast in the author of Revelation describes, as well as the events in the book, are perhaps best interpreted as hidden allusions to the rule of Domitian, possibly. Trajan, skilled ruler who established policies for treating Christians. Between military campaigns, Trajan found time to be an effective, albeit conservative, civilian administrator protecting the privileges of the Senate. He is also known for his impressive public works he undertook, especially in the Aqua. Trajan, the last of the aqueducts to serve Rome, a series of letters to the Bithynian governor Pliny. Trajan displays Trajan's concern for the welfare of the province. Unfortunately for Christians, this concern was combined with suspicious preoccupation with state security and a tendency to interfere in internal affairs of ostensibly self-governing cities. In one letter, he tells Pliny how to deal with Christians. They are not to be hunted out, although any who are accused and convicted should be punished, with the proviso that if a man says he is not a Christian and makes it obvious by his actual conduct, namely by worshiping our gods, then, however, suspect he may have been with regard to the past, he should be pardoned from his repentance. Marcus Aurelius, of course, the Stoic philosopher whose reign fueled anti-Christian hostilities. So except for those Christians, officially Marcus took the position of his predecessor Trajan, also followed by Hadrian and Antonius Pius, but his philosophical mentors convinced him that Christianity was a dangerous revolutionary force preaching gross immoralities, right? Further couldn't be true. So under Marcus, anti-Christian literature flourished for the first time, most notably Celsus, The True Doctrine. Most regrettably, Marcus allowed anti-Christian informers to proceed more easily than in the past, with the result that fierce persecutions broke out in various regions. Simpus Servus, and then the one that I want to get to is Diocletian, and then we'll wrap up the discussion on Roman persecution. I'll share this link with you guys as well. This is a good one. Here's that. Guys, smash that like, and also if you have any questions or comments, feel free to send those in. I will address them as we move through here. Last on the Roman persecution, Diocletian, 284 to 305. Gifted organizer who led the great persecution to extinguish Christianity. Boy, did that backfire. Because just after his reign, of course, we have the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, in which Constantine is victorious over the pagan Romans. This was an internal struggle for the imperial seat of Rome. And eventually we have the Edict of Milan, and then we have the Edict of Thessaloniki by Theodosius that makes it official religion of Rome. For those of you, Constantine just makes it legal to be a Christian, because at this point it's totally illegal. He makes it legal with the Edict of Milan, and then Emperor Theodosius makes it the official religion of Rome with the Edict of Thessaloniki. Let's see. So it was the first time in 50 years that an emperor had taken the trouble. Yet, as never before, the motive of the great persecution was the total extinction of Christianity. It was, it seems, the final struggle between the old and new orders, and therefore the fiercest. The first of Diocletian's edicts prohibited all Christian worship and commanded that churches and Christian books be destroyed. Two further edicts required in eastern provinces ordered clergy to be arrested unless they sacrificed to pagan deities. By 304, this edict was extended to all Christians and was particularly vicious in Africa under Diocletian co-August Maximian. After a serious illness in 304, Diocletian took the unprecedented step of abdicating the throne. Although called back for a brief period, he retired to farming in Dalmatia. The persecutions continued under Galerius, who promoted to Augustus, but falling seriously ill in 311, Galerius and his fellow emperors issued an edict canceling the persecution of Christians. Funny how they keep getting sick after persecuting Christians. The following year, Constantine emerged triumphant in the West after the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. In 313, he and Licinius soon took control the Eastern Empire, issued the Edict of Milan, which decreed full legal toleration of Christianity. So there's that. Now the next one I want to get to is the de-Christianization during the Reign of Terror. This is the French Revolution, right? And how many people are aware of the attack on Christianity therein? Let me just double check, make sure we don't have any super chats real quick. Again, major thank you to AC for the support. And it looks like we do. We have a very generous super chat that just came up over on Streamlabs. Let me pull that up. Thank you so much. Comes in from Victor Vigalar. Victor Vigalar donated a generous $50. Again, major thank you to AC and Victor Vigalar. He says, shout out to all the olden RVF members. Were you ever on the old Roosh V forum, DPH? God bless you, bud. No, I was never on the Roosh forum. I met Roosh one time when he, what was it? 2000, it was either 2020 or 2021. It was the Trad conference that Michael put together, and Michael Jones was there, myself, Roosh. I met Luke Kindrat there, and then Brother Augustine, Michael Witkoff was there. And so I met all of them. And so I was able to meet Michael Jones, and Roosh was there. Roosh didn't speak, but he was there in support of Michael Jones. So I did meet Roosh. He was a nice guy. But no, I was never part of the forum. But thank you very much, Victor, for the generous $50 super chat. I really appreciate that. Okay. Now let's get back to the de-Christianization of France. The Reign of Terror. So let me zoom in here so you guys can see this better. In 1793, which began with Louis's death on the 21st of January, was marked by the founding of repressive institutions such as the Revolutionary Law Courts in March and the Public Safety Committee in April. The Montagnards triumphed and the Jacobins were overthrown, several of them even beheaded. Among them were 5 Protestants. There you can see their names. De-Christianization. The phenomenon of de-Christianization was characterized principally by being short-lived and also not a government organization. The Public Safety Authority and the convention were hostile to, at least suspicious of the phenomenon. The first closure of churches was in the provinces under the aegis of deputies, representatives of the mission, or surveillance committees, but Paris was soon to follow suit. De-Christianization varied in intensity from one region to another. The campaign was twofold. And again, Western France was the worst compared to aspects of Eastern or Southeastern France. The campaign was twofold. First, all institutional religions had to be eradicated, and then a new civil religion of reason was established, the Celebration of Reason, the 10th of November, 1793. The convention moved from a Christian to a revolutionary era. Fabre de Egalantine succeeded in totally changing the calendar, which by abolishing Sunday and through the terminology adopted and emphasized the anti-Christian ideal. It was the beginning of a new history. They wanted to do away with, again, BC and AD. Time in the Western world is totally measured by, again, the life of Christ, which we see calls of this even in Western civilization now to change our dating of time. Were Protestants affected by the de-Christianization phenomenon? No Protestants belonged to the Parisian groups or were great de-Christianizers. On the other hand, some Reformed pastors who were supporters of a rational and moral worship influenced by Enlightenment ideals did not really fight against de-Christianization. Most pastors still active in 1793 to 1794 were made to stop their activity. The community then had to resort to private and family worship. In very few places, worship was maintained without interruption, notably in Saint Foy, in Guerande, and Bergerac. It was also the case that worship was never interrupted in chapels of the Danish, Dutch, and Swedish embassies. Some areas also rebelled openly, such as Drôme and Ardeche. Resignation of pastors. Of the 215 pastors in 1793, 98 resigned. 3/4 of the Southeast, almost as many as a number of Catholic priests. Worship was suspended almost everywhere, but most places only temporarily. In the Guard department, the number of resignations was approximate, with 57 pastors resigning. This appears to have been due to the hardline representative Bory, who systematically forced Protestant ministers to resign. Very few among them who resigned during this year did so of their own free will. 90 of them are presumed to have been forced and never supported reason worship. It should also be said that resignation did not mean relinquishing pastoral activities. Christenings or weddings, which were often celebrated within the family, had been customary for the Huguenots for some time. Now, when we read about the Bolsheviks, that was one of the things that they did, was nullify all baptisms and Christian marriages. We'll talk about that in just a second. On the 7th of May, 1974, Robespierre stopped de-Christianization. The convention ruled that the French people recognized the existence of a supreme being and immortality of the soul. The existence of the supreme being and immortality of the soul did not seem to contradict their beliefs of Protestants in the 18th century. Some pastors even considered aspects of revolutionary worship as part of their religious ideal. For example, convention member Lauch de Orleans can be quoted, "I never preached other than the love of freedom, equality of my fellow men. My only desire is to keep contributing to the well-being." From 1795, churches were reopened. When worship started again, those who had resigned were generally reintegrated into the body of pastors. In their minds, it had been a suspension rather than a relinquishing of ministry. Nevertheless, their number never grew back to what it had been, as 1/4 of the pastors in 1793 never became even evangelists again. some pastors turned to civil employment. In conclusion, it should be noted that Protestants had their own individual reactions to de-Christianization phenomenon, and that they were not united for or against the revolution. And so here is a article also on the violence towards Christians, blending biblical and Greek worldviews, again, indicative of the Olympic opening ceremony, viewing humans as an authority of truth, not God, in the transcendent structure of the Holy Trinity, and then reflecting the Pharisees. Aha, who would have thought that? So let me share this link with you guys as well, in case you want to read it later. We're going to move on to the Bolshevik Revolution now. Okay, so the next one. Now, this is a longer article, and I don't want to read the whole thing to you guys, but this was one of the best articles I could find online in regards to in history's bloodiest persecution of Christians, the Russian communists murder millions. So let's just read a few of these paragraphs. I also had another one, Russian Christianity and the Revolution, what happened? And so maybe we could, again, I don't know, we could read either one. This was an interesting video I found talking about Orthodox and Catholic persecution by the Bolsheviks. Look at this. Persecution of the church in the USSR. 1914, Orthodox faithful, 120 million. By 1937, 42 million. Monasteries, 953. By 1937, 0. Churches and chapels, 75,000. Probably less than 100. Educational institutions, 246 to 0. Bishops, 139 to 4. Parish clergy, 68,000, really 69,000 down to 200 people. And then consecrated institutions, 94,000 to 0. And so we're not going to watch this whole video, but this was a remembrance by the Vatican of what happened at the Bolshevik Revolution to Orthodox and Catholic Christians in Russia. But let's move back to the article here. I'm going to share this link. This one's, again, longer, but this is the better article, I believe. This was really good. So I'm going to share that with you guys here. And so we'll just read a few of these paragraphs. So those who forgot just how recent the Soviet war on the churches was will not find anything exceptional about a church in the heart of Moscow packed with people on a Sunday morning. But to simply read the name of the cathedral is to be reminded, consecrated May 25th, 2017 by Patriarch Kirill with Vladimir Putin in attendance. It is called the Church of the Resurrection of Christ and the New Martyrs and Confessors of the Russian Church. Services are presided over each Sunday by Bishop Tikhon, a man rumored to be Putin's confessor. The Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 brought to power men who hated God and Christianity in all its forms. Lenin, who would end up being embalmed and put on display like a dead pope after his premature passing, once called the idea of God as unutterable vileness. Yeah. The Russian Orthodox Church, as the chief repository of tradition and culture in Holy Mother Russia, had to be extinguished in order for the godless Soviet Union to rise from the ashes. The revolutionaries got to work as soon as they could. Over 12,000 clergy were murdered outright, shot, beaten to death, hanged, or drowned. And a secret 1930 police report put the number of Orthodox clergy that had died in prison camps at 42,000, basically 43,000. One day after taking power, the communists passed their decree on land, seizing all church property and buildings on October 26, 1917. The following month, church weddings were declared invalid, along with the registration of births and funerals. In January of 1918, the church was forced out of all the schools, and the state formally severed ties. The same month, Patriarch Tikhon pushed back, declaring the Bolsheviks anathema. He said, "Recover your senses, madmen. Bring an end to your bloody strife. You're not merely committing the deeds of Satan." Again, the theme of today's conversation is Satan's kingdom, which are condemning you to Gehenna in the next world and leave a dreadful curse upon your descendants in the present one. The Bolsheviks responded by putting him under house arrest and ramping up their assaults. While condemnation from a despised clergyman didn't bother them, his call to the faithful and to the potential to interfere with their plans: keep away from such monsters. The enemies of the church are trying to gain power over it and seize its property by force of guns. Resist them with the strength of your faith and join your voices in a powerful clamor of protest. The Bolsheviks went straight to work to silence these voices. John Kucherov, an archpriest in St. Petersburg, was murdered on October 31st. Metropolitan Vladimir of Kiev was strangled with a chain of his pectoral cross, together with the cautionary killings of Tsar Nicholas II, his wife, the crown prince, and his 4 beautiful daughters in the basement of the house where they were imprisoned. It was a crimson beginning to the rising Red Sea of blood. As Ted Byfield noted in his High Tide in the Turn, Metropolitan Hilarion described the carnage. Clergymen were murdered with particular brutality. They were buried alive, had cold water poured over them in sub-zero temperatures until they froze, were placed in boiling water, crucified, whipped to death, and chopped with axes. Many were tortured before their deaths or murdered along with their families or in the presence of their wives and children. The churches were blown up, vandalized, and smashed. Many broken churches still dot the Russian countryside today. Occasional instances of outraged resistance by the faithful were often effective at the time. The Bolsheviks preferred not to turn the people against them by opening fire. They first needed to solidify their position politically. They were already outlawing religious observance, a law that was met by another wave of defiant martyrs. Their defiance was met with force. They were shot, stabbed, and one clergyman was flung up into the air onto bayonets. In 1918 and 1919, a minimum of 28 bishops were executed, along with thousands upon thousands of clergymen and lay people. Let's get to Stalin. So, campaigns to drive people away from church continued alongside all of this, with an apathy named the League of Militant Godlessness under Yemelin Yaroslavsky, performing blasphemous parades of grotesque public mockeries of Christian ceremonies. Oh, okay. So kind of like, again, the Olympic opening ceremony. Huh. Interesting. The lesser-known 5-year plan of Joseph Stalin was his 5-year plans of atheism, in which he attempted to have all religious influence in the Soviet Union wiped out between 1932 and 1937. This is called the Great Purge. Between 1937 and 1938, bloody purges resulted in the arrest of 168,300 Russian Orthodox clergymen. At least 100,000 of those arrested were shot. It was these martyrs that the gleaming new cathedral in Moscow was dedicated to on a Sunday day last year, nearly a century after their demise. But the Soviets' own calculations, at least a third of city dwellers and 2/3 of rural population still had religious beliefs in 1937 when the purges began. But considering a deep-rooted Christian culture that had dominated every facet of Russian life on the eve of the Bolshevik Revolution, this was a victory, although a costly victory attained by the willingness to transform clergy into corpses. It became clear that religious sentiment had completely disappeared with the coming of the Second World War, known as to the Russians as the Great Patriotic War. Stalin was forced to call his anti-religious campaigns in order to rally the support of the people, and he even allowed some of the churches to reopen and disband the League of the Militant Godless, which would be effectively replaced in 1947 by the All-Union Society of Political and Scientific Knowledge. In a truly vile turn of hypocrisy, Stalin attempted to resuscitate a servile shell of the Russian Orthodox Church in order to present the Soviet Union as defending Christian civilization against the Nazi devils. Under the watchful eye of the KGB, the Russian Orthodox Church elected a new patriarch, opened new theological schools, and reopened shuttered churches. Some of the clergymen who had survived their time in prison camps were allowed to return, although many more were not. In the meantime, clergymen presiding in territory retaken by the Red Army were promptly sent off to concentration camps on trumped-up charges to take the place of their released brethren. Stalin's new toleration did not extend to Russian Baptists, who were viewed with suspicion due to their foreign ties. And so again, you guys can read the rest of that article. I just shared it, and you can read this article as well. This is a good one. Again, comes from a website dedicated to Christian history, talking about the Bolsheviks and their revolution. So I'll share that with you guys right here. And then next one is remembering those martyred by socialism during the Spanish Civil War. This is one that I figured most people would be less familiar with. So every November 6th, the Roman Catholic Church in Spain commemorates the saints martyred by the communists during the Spanish Civil War. During the Red Terror of the 1930s, communists killed more than 6,800 bishops, priests, monks, and they keep saying religion. I don't know if this is a bad translation from the Spanish. It should just be Christians. Yet outside Spain, their story is largely forgotten. So 1931, Red Terror began before the Civil War. Local elections were held on April 12th, 1931. Monarchist candidatures won an overwhelming number of seats contested nationwide, but 41 of the 51 capitals of provinces were taken by the pro-Republic side, 38 for the Republican Socialist Coalition, with the Socialist Party as one of its members, and 3 from the Catalan Nationalist Party. The results in most province capitals were understood by the monarchists as a defeat. 2 days later, the Republic was proclaimed, and the monarch Alfonso of the House of Bourbon left Spain because he wanted to avoid a civil war. The new political era was also the beginning of a wave of anti-clerical violence derived from laicism. On May 10th, the monarchists opened a new center of political agitation in Madrid, which was immediately subjected to massive riots. As a result, from May 11th to the 13th, many churches throughout the nation were burned, beginning in Madrid, but expanding to cities like Seville, Cordoba, Murcia, and Malaga. Malaga was home to one of the worst cases of anti-clerical phenomenon. Its military governor did not intervene until midday on May 12th, when he ordered the police to withdraw from the fray. In a few days, thousands of buildings and even classical works of art from painters such as Francisco de Zurbarán and Alonso Cano were burned. The Communist Party organized many of these acts of arson, which the provisional government did nothing to stop. The Minister of the Interior, Miguel Moura, refused to send in the civil guard. The government's views were summed up by the Minister of War at the time, who declared, "All the convents of Spain are not worth the life of one Republican." Revolutions, 1934. 3 years later, left-wing actors such as the Communist Party, the Socialist Party, the General Union Workers, the Iberian Anarchist Federation, and the National Confederation of Labor organized a general strike between October 5th and 19 to protest against centrist President Alejandro Lerroux. He had appointed members of the Catholic and Conservative Party to 3 ministerial positions. The regions of Asturias and Catalonia were the centers of that strike, which is sometimes called the Revolution of Asturias. While the village of Mieres was the focus of insurrectional movement, protesters, mainly miners that took almost all the region, proclaimed the Asturian Socialist Republic. This period sparked a new era of anti-Christian persecution in Asturias. 34 Christians were murdered and 58 religious buildings were burned. In Turan, the 9 Christians who were associated with Christian schools were tortured and killed. Half a dozen male students of the Oviedo Seminary from the ages of 18 to 21 were murdered. The same fate awaited parish priests in tiny villages like Robledo and Valdecuna. The brutality convicts Generals Francisco Franco and Manuel Goded to send the Spanish Foreign Legion and Moroccan colonel troops to the northern region, and the socialist movement was defeated. Popular Front, so this is 1936 to 1939. The Popular Front, a coalition of left-wing parties, including the Socialist Party, Esquerra Republicana, and the Communist Party, took power in 1936 through election fraud. Oh, wow. Election fraud. I wonder if that relates to Maduro or the 2020 American election. Interesting. Maybe we're under communist control right now. Leftist forces organized illegal demonstrations intended to foment revolutionary discontent. All respect for private property was abandoned. Police delegates who had previously served as socialist activists led the arbitrary arrest of many right-wing politicians, the forcible dissolution of rightist and monarchist groups, and an escalation of political violence during these months. This triggered a military uprising in July 18th, 1936, prompted in part by Franco and General Emilio Mola. During this time, the area is still ruled by the Republican side, were the scenes of dramatic religious persecution. Again, 6,800 Christians were murdered between 1936 and 1939, including 13 bishops, 4,184 priests. As many as 20,000 churches were destroyed, many of them before the war commenced. One of the deadliest massacres came in the autumn of 1936. At least 5,000 citizens were killed in the city of Paracuelos de Jarama, Madrid, by order of Madrid Committee of Defense, which was ruled by communists. People, especially women, were murdered for attending mass. Anyone associated with the public opposition was liquidated. The former general secretary of the Communist Party, Santiago Carrillo, who would go on to serve as general secretary of the Communist Party of Spain before ending his life as a democratic socialist, is believed to bear much of the responsibility for these massacres. Anti-Christian terror accompanied the socialist or communist domination of any region until the Spanish Civil War ended in 1939 with Franco's dictatorship. Really, he was restored to the monarchy, and unfortunately for Spain, Franco had economic problems. But again, this is a little bit of the insight into the Spanish Civil War. Let me share this article with you guys as well, in case you want to read that again in the future. So that one's there. And then religious persecution. Now let's look at a little bit of religious persecution around the globe right now. So as I said, Christianity is still the most persecuted religion in the world. This is just an article. We're not going to read it, but talking about, again, how Christians are still the most persecuted. The blood of martyrs, wrote second century church father Tertullian, is the seed of the church. And this just persecution over the century has often brought about the best in believers of all faiths and none, clarifying that they stood at one point dying for it. But surely the 21st century, there is no need for that. Surely tolerance is advancing. Not in the slightest. Right now, more people are persecuted for the faith than ever, and the large majority of them are Christian. Over 200 million of them around the world are facing a near constant threat to their lives and livelihoods. Do you hear that? Almost 200 million brothers and sisters in Christ are literally facing severe persecution, potential death. This slips under the radar of the secular West, apart from exceptional events such as the suicide bombers killing more than 250 people in Sri Lankan churches last Easter. This was also around the time that Notre Dame Cathedral was set on fire, most likely by Muslim arson. The legacy of colonialism means most believe that Christians are the ones in power doing the persecuting, but that's not so. And so, again, I'll share this article with you guys if you want to read the rest of it. It's just talking a little bit about global persecution in general. And then here's one. New book says Christians suffered most. This is The Guardian trying to debunk a book that came out. A new book which claims that Christians are the victims of worldwide persecution has stirred controversy in Italy amid accusations that it minimizes the Holocaust and demonizes Islam. Oh my gosh. So we're saying if you actually write a book about Christian persecution in the 21st century, somehow that's in opposition to the Holocaust and it demonizes Muslims. Interesting. And so the author, Antonio Sossi, claims the untold story of the 20th century is that the murder of 45 million Christians, mostly at the hand of communist and Islamic regimes, and that the massacres continue to this day. The new persecuted inquiries into anti-Christian intolerance in the new century of martyrs has angered some scholars by depicting Christians as beleaguered victims of rampaging Muslims. Again, we'll look at an article here literally highlighting how much persecution Christians have in the Middle East. So drawing heavily from the World Christian Encyclopedia published last year by Oxford University Press, Mr. Sossi traces the persecution of Christians through the centuries, from the crucifixion of Jesus to the lions of Circus Maximus, the assassination of Thomas Becket, and the execution of Thomas More, the Boxer Rebellion in China, Mexico's revolution and the Turkish massacres in Armenia. Yeah, I didn't even bring up the Armenian genocide, the Muslim persecution of Christians. 2 million were killed. He calculates that in the past 2,000 years, some 70 million Christians have been killed, 2/3 in the past 100 years alone. A bloodbath blamed mostly on the Soviet Union as well as communist China and Nazi Germany. Aha. So his book, again, highlights that 1/3 of the global deaths of Christians has occurred in the last 200 years. Last 200 years. Here's this article. Again, they're trying to debunk this author. So there you go there. Next one is Christian persecution and religious freedom. So this is highlighting that Christians are suffering persecution in 140 countries. 140 countries. Christian persecution today. More than 387 million Christians live in countries where religious freedom is not honored. That means 1 in 7 Christians in the world today are facing persecution. Let me share this article with you guys as well. So the merciless targeting of Christians driven by hatred of Christians and the faith itself emerges as a common denominator in hundreds of testimonies of persecution by the Aid to the Church in Need, ACN, from countries around the world as a Catholic charity providing emergency aid and pastoral support to the persecuted and suffering church in 148 countries. ACN is committed. Again, this is their website. So what is Christian persecution? In almost 1/3 of the world's countries, Christians are being persecuted. Where do we see the most persecution? In Africa. Again, a place in which Islam is growing quite rapidly. 21 out of 54 countries in Africa, that means almost 40%, suffer dangerous levels of persecution. 13 countries suffer extreme forms of persecution in Africa, with Nigeria being the biggest. 8 countries suffer discrimination. 12 countries are under observation. 9 of those countries are suffering from Islamist extremists or from border regions. Here's the Middle East. Although Iraq is seen as an improvement due to the post-ISIS stabilization program, it has now become home to only around 150,000 Christians, and many still immigrate. And let me highlight here that one of the greatest impacts for Christianity in the Middle East was actually the war in Iraq by America. It was the U.S. that decimated the Christian population in the Middle East, specifically Iraq. And so this talks about, again, Muslims murdering Christians in the Middle East, which is severe. In Asia, religious nationalism has sparked severe repression of Christians and other minority groups throughout Asia. In the Maldives, non-Muslims are not considered full citizens. In India and Sri Lanka, Christians and their places of worship are attacked with impunity. How many people knew that the Hindus in India are constantly persecuting Christians? In Pakistan, Christians are routinely harassed, and growing numbers of young Christian girls are kidnapped, forcibly married to Muslim men, and convert to Islam. They are often raped as well. Punishment for these crimes often takes years, if it ever comes, as authorities in Pakistan are often apathetic about crimes against Christians. And anybody who's following the Pakistani rape gangs in the UK know that it's not uncommon that, it was over 1,000 girls in the UK were raped by Pakistani Muslim men, and the UK police were hiding it for fear of outrage against Muslims. Now, some of you probably saw, what was it, in Southport? I forget which city. Just recently, all these little girls, I'm talking about children, were stabbed, one stabbed to death by a 17-year-old Muslim immigrant. I'm not sure which country he came from. It looked like it was either the Middle East or North Africa. But this is a huge problem in Europe because, again, the mass immigration of Muslims, which if you follow the rest of the stream and on the website, we'll be talking about the gates of Toledo and how that may or may not relate to everything that we're discussing. 5 facts about persecution from Christians in the Middle East. 1, persecution of Christians is perhaps the most virulent in the region of the birthplace of Christianity. Oh, the birthplace. So you mean like Israel? Huh. And I have an article discussing Israeli um, persecution and spitting on Christians. Israel is not a welcoming place for Christianity, that's for sure. Two, the forms of persecution range from routine discrimination in education, employment, and social life up to kidnapping, murder, and other genocidal acts against Christian communities. Three, in some areas of the region, the state extremist groups, families, and communities participate collectively in persecution and discriminatory behavior. Four, for the past few years, the most common forms of persecution have been martyrdom, violent threats, general harassment, detention, imprisonment, legal discrimination, and incitements to hatred through media and the Islamic pulpits. And five, the report states that the main impact for such genocidal acts against Christian is exodus. Christianity now faces the possibility of being wiped out in parts of the Middle East where its roots go back the furthest. In Palestine, Christian numbers are below 1.5%. In Syria, the Christian population has declined from 1.7 million in 2011 to 450,000. In Iraq, Christian numbers have dropped 1.5 million before 2003 to below 120,000 million. And that is mostly due to the U.S. influence. And so you look at the U.S. and what have they done? The displacement of Iraqi Christians, the bombing of Serbia, the supporting of the Ukrainian war, the support of Israeli genocide of the Palestinians. It's funny how the U.S. government seems to be on the wrong side of all the Christian persecution that's happening in the world. This is another article, and I'm not going to read it to you now, but this is just highlighting that the U.S. invasion and the rise of militancy actually was antithetical to the growth of Christianity in Iraq and the Middle East. And this is just AP News here. So this is a secular source highlighting, again, what the U.S. government has done. Here's another article. Iraqi Christians are threatened with extinction 20 years after the U.S.-led invasion. Again, it's down to 120,000 in a state in which Iraq has great influence of Shia Islam by Iran. And they are certainly not tolerant of Christianity. So here's another article there. I just shared the link so you guys can check that out if you're interested. And then here's the Holy War, the fight for Ukraine's church and monasteries. What do we know? The Patriarch Bartholomew is really close friends with Mike Pompeo. Again, the former Secretary of State or Defense, I think it was the Secretary of State under Trump. And of course, he is very much in favor of the annihilation of Russia, the massive genocide of Ukrainian men. We know for a fact that Ukrainians have, there's at least the death toll of ethnic Ukrainians is over 500,000 people. And hundreds of thousands of others have fled the country. The male Ukrainian population is absolutely decimated. And that's why you now see videos of people with Down syndrome, men in their 60s, boys that are 14, 16 years old being sent to the front lines to fight a war that they can never win due to the encroachment of NATO and U.S. forces trying to take over Ukraine for the World Economic Forum and BlackRock's vision of reconstructing Ukraine in the sort of vision of the Great Reset of 2030. So, and then we see the imprisonment of clergy. We've seen the killing of Christians in Ukraine. We've seen the taking over of a false jurisdiction, which unfortunately has been recognized by the Patriarch of Constantinople, by Bartholomew. This is a tragedy. This is a tragedy. And we can see the globalist sentiments in the military-industrial complex already infusing itself through the CIA with various patriarchates, particularly that of Constantinople, and basically recognizing things that historically is out of line in regard to the structure of church and how we recognize various dioceses and jurisdictions. And so we now have a fake Ukrainian church, which occupies the monasteries. Meanwhile, the actual patriarch is in exile. So that this article talks a little bit about that. But if you're an Orthodox Christian and you haven't been following the persecution in Ukraine, I highly recommend you do so, because again, this is backed by the U.S. government, just as it did in the bombing of Serbians. Explore Christian persecution by country. Again, Nigeria, 50% lives in the South Nigeria. Sadly, Nigeria has become known as the world's center for Christian martyrs. In any given year, the number of Christians killed by extremist groups is rarely less than 4,000, often more than the rest of the world combined.
The anti-Christian violence is significantly localized in the north, where 12 Muslim majority states declared Sharia law in 1999, resulting in huge numbers of Christians beginning to experience daily discrimination. But it was the rise of an extremist movement called Boko Haram, which first started the murderous attacks in 2009 that resulted in Christians experiencing unprecedented violence. So again, as I said, Nigeria is one of the leaders in the persecution of Christ's soldiers. Here is church burnings in Canada tied to unproven discovery of unmarked graves as residential schools. Again, we're not going to read this, but at least 85 Catholic churches have been set ablaze or vandalized since the unproven discovery on May 27, 2021 of 215 suspected unmarked graves near the Kamloops Indian Residential School. Now, what this article will also discuss is it's now apparent that there is no evidence of a mass unmarked graves of these Native Americans, and that the government of Canada, which we know is a communist structure, Trudeau, which I wouldn't be surprised if he is a homosexual. I think that's probably likely based on his mannerisms. I'll put it that way. But the government basically backed this false narrative and allowed for persecution of their Catholic population. And this led to, as the article showed, at least 85 churches being burned and vandalized. Now we know it was totally fake. No, it was never true. There's no evidence whatsoever. Pim says, the great Carnegie endowment. Yeah, no joke. Yeah, the fact that they were unmarked graves has been debunked. Exactly. It's all been debunked, and the Canadian government was behind the pushing of a false narrative that led to the persecution of Christians in Canada. And we've seen also during 2021, did you guys, they have what is he, Russian or Belarusian? There's a man, he's a Protestant, he's not Orthodox, but he refused to shut his church down. He was praying in public, and I think he's still in jail. I'm not sure if we have any Canadians, but there is an Eastern European Protestant pastor who was resistant to the draconian lockdown laws and principles of the Canadian government, and he was imprisoned for it. And then he tried to come to the U.S. and seek refuge, and because he spoke out against his government in the U.S., they arrested him again. Report documents rampant Christian persecution in China. So Christians in China have continued to face various forms of persecution, including syncretization, educational reforms, and widespread rights abuse, coupled with stringent laws under the repressive regime of the Chinese Communist Party, says Christian rights watchdog. In 2022, China Aid has felt day by day the CCP's escalated persecution against Christian churches and Christians in mainland China, which explains why churches and Christians in China become increasingly afraid of exposing their lived persecution experience to the outside world, the report read. Again, and you can read more. I'll share this link with you guys here. So China, and of course we know that they have re-education camps for the Uyghurs, who are Turkish Muslims mixed with Chinese ancestry. It's in the far western province of China, and they have re-education camps for them. And of course, it's been rumored that Christians have also been sent to those re-education camps. So that's that link right there. And then, of course, China had the anti-Christian movement during the Communist Revolution, which was outright, explicitly anti-Christian. I mean, the movement was literally anti-Christian movement. Here's the Hanzi, the Chinese characters for it, if anybody reads Chinese. But the May 4th movement brought in modern Western ideologies as possible ideological framework for the modernization of China, and some of them were critical of religion, such as Marxism, rationalism, and socialism. These skeptical views against religion had entered into the intellectual debate for Chinese modernizations, which led to the thinking that the Christian faith was a superstition, and it was imposed upon the Chinese people by Western imperialists. Persecution of Christians in Soviet Union. We talked about that. Here is persecution of Christians coming close to genocide in the Middle East. This was even by the leftist Secular Guardian article. Pervasive persecution of Christians, sometimes amounting to genocide, is ongoing in parts of the Middle East and has prompted an exodus in the past 2 decades, according to a report commissioned by the British Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt. Millions of Christians in the region have been uprooted from their homes, and many have been killed, kidnapped, imprisoned, and discriminated against, the report finds. It also highlights discrimination across Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and East Asia, often driven by state authoritarianism. The inconvenient truth, reports find, is the overwhelming majority, 80% of persecuted religious believers are Christians. You guessed it. And so here's this article. Again, if you guys want to check that out later. And then the next one, North Korea, persecution of Christians intensify. This is an article from 2022. The photos of fishermen who are recently seeking asylum being physically forced to return to communist North Korea against their will and without due process, the law, are painful view, said Congressman Chris Smith. Under the North Korean government, severe human rights violation, the number of defectors has averaged to 1,300 per year. In a report, a former correctional officer in North Korea, Kim Chil-seok, said, "We constantly receive Workers' Party of Korea directives prohibiting the practice of superstitious activities. From above, they sent down the orders of guidelines from Kim Jong-un. We got many of those in 2018 and 2019, about once a month. Previously, we got the same content about once a year." So before Korea's liberation from the Japanese colonization in 1945, there were 3,022 churches, approximately 300,000 Christians throughout North Korea, as an estimated by the North Korean Church Reconstruction Committee, a committee on the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church of Korea. Even the WPK's annual report, published in 1950, articulated that there were 2,000 churches, approximately 200,000 Protestants, and 53,000 Catholics in North Korea. And one of the things that I will say that I recently read, I don't have the article on it, you guys can look it up, is that with the alliance between Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un, Russia and North Korea, I have seen an article. I don't know the full extent of it, but I did see an article that said that the Russian Orthodox Church now has a church in North Korea and is performing services and has a Russian bishop over it. Now, I don't know the extent to that, but that would certainly be a positive step forward if Kim Jong-un and North Korea is recognizing the Russian Orthodox Church. You know, God willing, many of those Christians that are being persecuted in North Korea convert to that faith. Will they stop burning an empty church? Anti-Christian attacks rise in Europe. I don't need to tell you guys anything, but one of the interesting notes here that I wanted to say is that the French Interior Ministry recorded 996 anti-Christian acts in 2019, an average of 2.7 per day. This is just in France, guys. This is just in France. The true figure may be higher, as it is thought that officials do not count fires of undetermined cause at churches across the country. On July 4th, for example, a fire devastated the parish of St. Paul. Investigators concluded that the blaze resulted from a gas leak caused by squatters, but locals questioned the official explanation. The same thing that's happening in England is happening in France. Over the past 2 years, French government officials have started to talk about it more publicly, perhaps because the visibility of such attacks is now so great. Both President Emmanuel Macron, who I believe is a homosexual and his wife is a man, and new Prime Minister John Castex have, for instance, spoken clearly and forcibly about the recent attack on the cathedral in Nantes. He said, while the number of officially recorded anti-Christian incidents has remained steady over the past 2 years, it has risen by 285% between 2008 and 2019, according to Ellen Fontini. Now, what happened in France between 2008 and 2019 that could result in an increase of 285% increase in anti-Christian violence? I think you guys know the answer. So I'll share this link with you guys as well. And then here is a video of Christians being spit on in Israel. So this video kind of went viral.
At a church doorway this week.
And so we have, unfortunately, many dispensationalist Christians in America who believe that Israel is the same thing as the historic Israel, which is not the case. Israel is the Orthodox Church. We are Israel. We are the upholders of the Second Covenant. And so here is a video, and I'm going to show you guys articles. Again, here is an Al Jazeera article, Death to Christians, Violence Steps Up Under New Israeli Government. This is just from April of last year. And here's a little bit of the flavor that you get if you're a Christian visiting Israel right now.
Orthodox Jews spit toward Christians carrying a cross in occupied East Jerusalem this week, an act of religious hatred, igniting a scandal in Israel and beyond. Other videos, also widely seen on social media, show Jews spitting toward nuns outside a church. And yet another where Jews spit at a church doorway. Israeli police say they have arrested 5 people, one a minor, in the latest incident. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu condemned the spitting attacks. But religious leaders, including the top Roman Catholic cardinal in Jerusalem, say they're concerned over a rising number of anti-Christian acts in Israel. Some ultranationalist and settler leaders say spitting at or near Christians and churches is a legitimate Jewish tradition with a long history.
Go figure. Go figure. And again, in the second part of this video, I'm going to be discussing some of the recent allegations of the 9 to 10 IDF soldiers that were arrested for apparently an understanding by the Israeli military that they were allowed to sodomize and rape Palestinian men that are held prisoners. Yes. And so I saw Father John Whiteford sharing what was coming out regarding this, and people from the Likud party in Israel have actually stated that they are justified, the IDF soldiers are justified and allowed to rape any Palestinian prisoner because they may be part of Hamas. And so we're seeing an official stance by Israel that their soldiers are allowed to commit homosexual rape of potentially Orthodox Christian and Muslim men due to their genocide of Palestinians. And so here's an article highlighting, again, the attacks of Christians in Jerusalem. A couple of days later, Armenians leaving a memorial service in the Armenian quarter say they were attacked by Israeli settlers carrying sticks. An Armenian was pepper sprayed as settlers scaled the walls of the Armenian convent trying to take down its flag, which had a cross on it. Wonder why are they so antagonistic to Christ? When Armenians chased them away, the settlers began shouting, "Terrorist attack," prompting nearby border police to draw their guns on the Armenians, beating and detaining one of them. Instead of the soldiers calming or condemning the settlers, it was looking into the eyes of the soldier and telling him to calm down, one of the attacked Armenian youth told Al Jazeera. Hostility by fundamentalist Jews toward Jerusalem's Christian community is not new. And it's not just Armenian Christians who suffer from it. Priests from all denominations describe being spat at for years. Since 2005, Christian celebrations around Holy Week, particularly Holy Fire Saturday, have brought military barricades and harsh treatment from soldiers and settlers alike, with the number of worshipers allowed inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre drastically limited from as many as 11,000 historically during the Holy Fire ceremony to now 1,800 since last year, with authorities citing safety concerns. At the beginning of the year, 30 Christian graves at the Protestant Mount Zion Cemetery were desecrated. In the Armenian corner, vandals spray painted "Death to Arabs, Christians, and Armenians" on the walls. And so I'll talk more about this again in the second portion of today's stream. And here is anti-Christian hatred. The commission ignores burning churches. This was the parliamentary EU commission that found, again, that Christians were the majority of those persecuted in Europe, despite the claims of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia were not totally accurate. And then here's America's forgotten bullshit bombing of Serbia, in which it killed approximately 1,500 Serb Orthodox Christian civilians killed by NATO's bombing in one of the biggest sham morality plays of the modern era. This was under President Bill Clinton. As British professor Philip Hammond recently noted, the 78-day bombing campaign was not a purely military operation. NATO also destroyed what it called dual-use targets such as factories, city bridges, and even main television buildings in downtown Belgrade in an attempt to terrorize the country into surrender. Clinton's unprovoked attack on Serbia, intended to help the ethnic Albanians, which is majority Muslim, seize control of Kosovo, set a precedent. And then they have one of the biggest military bases in Kosovo, the U.S. does, set a precedent for humanitarian warning that was invoked by supporters of George W. Bush's unprovoked attack in Iraq, Barack Obama's bombing of Libya, and Donald Trump's bombing of Syria. So I'll share this link with you guys as well. So the point of all these articles, and then the rest, the next one begins, and the rest of this I'm going to have behind a paywall for any potential violation of TOS here on YouTube. And so I can more freely articulate my thoughts and connect some dots that I hope are useful to you guys. But I hope what is clear is the point of today's stream was to provide a little bit of a historical overview of Christian persecution, but also highlight that Christians are still the most persecuted religion and groups of people in the world today. And this is true in almost the majority of the world. So Africa, East Asia, the Middle East, these are the hot spots. Even Southeast Asia are hot spots for Christian persecution, India being included in that. And that when we look at what's happening historically and what's happening today, there are many, many similarities. And I think that we as followers of Christ and soldiers of Christ need to keep our eyes open and realize that as the Western civilization becomes more anti-Christian, and the Olympics opening ceremony is indicative of that, more things are going to occur. More violence is going to erupt. And it just takes a significant group of people to take over power. And what happened in the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, again, as the saint said, what happened in Russia will happen tomorrow in America, that it's coming and our persecution is coming. Now, according to the prophecies of the saints, again, we did a whole stream on that. And if you'd like to learn more, go to eschatonvigil.org. There's also the prophecy of the Great War. And as the Great War comes and the World War III emerges, there is a golden age of orthodoxy. And so great persecution is going to come, but on the other side of that is also a golden age for the spreading of Christ's church, his faith, his tradition, and the true followers, the body of Christ. So I think there's optimism, and also to realize that the persecution that we face in the contemporary world today isn't the same as historical circumstances. So we looked at the 10 ways in which early Christians were tortured. And some of those may come back. I mean, some of those are still existing in the Middle East today in regards to the carrying people by horses and doing horrible things to their bodies. But now the persecution is pornography. The persecution is the degenerate sin that's prevalent in our society. I think it's Father Sarah from Rose that said the tortures and the physical persecution of early Christians is now a mental and spiritual torture of contemporary Christians. And we need to keep that in mind. So are we being persecuted right now? I'd say yes, we absolutely are. Is it to the degree of the Bolshevik Revolution? Are they killing people in the millions? No, not yet. Not in Western civilization, but all the foundations are set. All the stones are being put in place. And we need to be aware of that. And we got to stand strong in our faith. And the way that we fight is by being good soldiers of Christ, not backing down from our values and our morality and the teachings of the church, getting married, having children, and making sure that we raise children in the faith. That's the way that we win in a generation 2 or 3. So that is the stream, guys. Smash that like. Again, the second half of this stream, we'll be talking about more controversial topics. Will be up at the website for anybody who is a website member. Again, that's $5 a month, and I'll share that link for you guys here. Really appreciate all the support, guys. Smash that like. Isabel throws in, was that 100 Norwegian dollars? Looks like that's about $10 in USD. She says, when I told a friend that I was exploring Orthodoxy, his response was, Some Orthodox groups still persecute and kill other Christians. Hadn't heard this. Is this even true? What is he talking about? No. What Orthodox groups are persecuting other Christians? The only thing that I can explicitly think of is the war between Russia and Ukraine right now. But can somebody inform me? Isabel, I don't know what they're referring to either. Can somebody chime in? Is there an example of Orthodox Christian persecuting other Christians? I don't know of any example. Even within Russia, there's significant minorities of Protestants and Catholics, but I don't know if they're being persecuted. I'm not aware of that. Oh, it's the GOC versus new calendars. Well, yeah. And still, they're not being persecuted to the same degree. I mean, being not in communion with the new calendars or the old calendars, this is more of a juridical. Yeah, but the true Orthodox, they're out of communion with the actual body. So, and there's real talks too. So that, I've talked with clergy, and I've had Bishop Maximus on the stream. We talked about philosophy and theology, and he is a bishop of the Old Calendar Greek Church. And I've talked with clergy. I'm not going to say who they are, but they're people that you would very much know. And they have hope that potentially they'll be brought back into the fold through through ROCOR, and potentially the old calendars will be brought back into communion. And if Bartholomew and this ecumenical union that's supposed to happen in 2025 happens, many suspect that this would be a point in which the old calendars may be brought in as well. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's not persecuted, but just no communion. Yeah, well, I think that's fine when you deny the church structure. So, that's an internal division that I think will be potentially worked out. And even Metropolitan Neophytos talked about the council or synod that will happen after the Great War, and that's going to correct many of the errancies that are currently occurring. He says Bartholomew is a free man. I don't want to speak ill on any patriarch, but I will say Bartholomew keeps doing things which insinuate a very close tie with the State Department of the U.S. and the CIA. So I'll leave you guys to make your decision on that. I'm certainly frustrated with many things that Bartholomew is doing. Again, God bless him, and I hope he preserves the faith. Let's just put it that way. So thank you very much, Isabella. Really appreciate that support. And then Pim throws in $10. Says, DPH, you should try to get Candace Owens. She's heavily been focusing on the persecution of Christians. Yeah, I've saw a few of her videos. She was talking very openly about the Bolshevik Revolution and naming some of the major players that had persecuted Christians. And I've been following her conversations on Brigitte Macron, because I do think that I read one of the articles that one of the French journalists wrote that got arrested for talking about her being transgender. And it does seem pretty conclusive. And it makes sense then why the French government would arrest these journalists. And it makes sense the fact that Brigitte Macron can't produce any evidence showing that she was ever pregnant or was a woman before the age of 30 something. I think is pretty eye-opening. And that may relate to American politics as well. I think most of you guys know what I'm talking about. But if I could get, I would be happy to do a conversation with Candace Owens. I think I did see a clip where she was using Manly P. Hall in one of her videos. I don't know if she realizes that Manly P. Hall was a Freemason and an esotericist, but she used it to talk about the death of spirituality amongst higher intellectuals and elites. Agreed with that, but I don't know. It feels like she's still getting her feet wet in regards to some of these deeper rabbit holes, but I hope she keeps going. Obviously, we know she was kicked off Daily Wire because of her discoveries regarding history. And so God bless Candace Owens. I hope she continues to do what she's doing. Pim said, yeah, she owned Pierce Morgan. Pierce Morgan is an idiot. Pierce Morgan, I swear. It's like every time I watch one of his, Uncensored, he always has like a very milquetoast, moderate opinion. So he'll have Israelis on and give a moderate opinion of the Palestinians. Then he'll have Palestinians on, and he'll give a sort of milquetoast defense of Israel. I don't even know if Piers Morgan has any authentic opinions. At least that's when I watch his. It doesn't seem to be. He does not seem to be an authentic man. In regards to when she owned Piers Morgan, his response to Brigitte Macron being a man was ridiculous. It's like he didn't provide any evidence. His whole thing was, if she was, then the media would say or highlight this, which Candace highlighted that, well, the French journalist tried to, and they got arrested for it. So Piers Morgan is such a shill, and I really don't think that dude has any authentic opinions that he's willing to defend. He's like a branch in the wind. He will blow in any direction that his superiors tell him to. And then guys, make sure you smash that like, and let me just check, see if anybody sent anything in over on the Streamlabs. Yeah, pure soy man Morgan. That's pretty. Yeah, I could get behind that. Macron married his nanny, who is actually a. Yeah, I think that's pretty legitimate. I think it's pretty legitimate. So, guys, this is going to conclude my stream today. Again, I'm going to hop off here, take a quick break, and then I'm going to record the second half of this stream over on the website. I promise you guys, we'll be getting into some deeper rabbit holes and some things that, again, most people would find potentially punishable here on YouTube. So I'm going to be doing that. So, guys, smash that like. Jim Bob said raid, Crispy said raid made by Jim Bob. All right, let me see if I can do that real quick. We'll go over to, you guys will go over to Jim Bob. Let me see. Customization, redirect. All right. Okay, so I think you guys are now set up. Most people will be redirected over to Made by Jim Bob. Again, smash that like. Thank you guys so much for your support. A major, major thank you to AC for his incredibly generous super chats. Thank you to Victor Ziegler for his generous super chat. Thank you to Pim, Isabel, Josiah, Elleron, Well Emmanuel, iPack Arts, my brother, Storm the Cat, and Andrew. Really appreciate all you guys. Thank you so much for your support. And again, I will see you tomorrow at noon with Father Turbo. We'll be talking about death to the world, and we'll be talking about Orthodox praxis and asceticism. So I will see you all then. As always, until next time, God bless.